Before we start, make sure you're warm, safe and settled. No need to stay awake, this is your permission to doze off. In the frosty embrace of Scandinavia, where the sun sometimes forgets to set or rise, the Vikings carved out a life, and a legendary afterlife, that has fascinated and occasionally misled us for centuries. These folks weren't just marauding warriors with a penchant for plundering, they were also expert shipbuilders, traders, and, here's the kicker, quite the funeral planners. When it came to bidding farewell, they didn't just settle for a few words and a somber procession. No, they went full throttle with rituals that have since become the stuff of legend, often misconstrued thanks to Hollywood's imaginative flair. Let's get one thing straight. Vikings and their funerals didn't always involve a flaming longboat sent adrift on the sea. Sorry to burst the cinematic bubble, but those fiery send-offs would have been as rare as a snow-free Norwegian winter. More typically, they'd bury their dead in ship-shaped graves on land, because, let's face it, setting a boat on fire was a pricey spectacle. And if you think funerals today are a strain on the pocketbook, imagine living in a time when wealth was measured in livestock and silver arm rings. Sending a perfectly good ship up in smoke was like torching a luxury yacht today. Probably not something you'd do for Uncle Olaf, unless you had cash to burn. But before we dive deep into the logistics of Viking funerals, let's set the scene. The Viking Age spanned from around 793 to 166 AD, a time when Norsemen from Scandinavia navigated their longships to far-flung shores. These seafarers hailed from modern-day Norway, Sweden and Denmark, and their exploits took them to places as varied as the British Isles, Greenland and even the Byzantine Empire. They were traders, settlers and warriors, with the sea as their highway and lifeblood. So, it's no wonder that their funerary customs often intertwined with their maritime mastery. The sea wasn't just a backdrop for their epic tales, it was an integral part of their identity. Imagine living in a world where the horizon is dominated by icy waters and rugged coastlines. For the Vikings, the sea was a gateway to both riches and the afterlife. Their gods, like Njord and Aegir, were deities of the sea, reflecting its centrality in their culture. This connection between water and life extended to death, where the journey to the afterlife was often envisioned as a voyage across cosmic waters. In a society where the sea was both a livelihood and a cultural cornerstone, it's little wonder that ships played such a pivotal role in their funeral rites. However, not every Viking got a ship burial. Much like today, where a top-tier funeral involves a hefty price tag, only the elite chieftains, renowned warriors, and the super-rich were given the honour of a burial involving a full-sized ship. For the average Norse farmer, a more modest affair was in order, often involving a burial mound or a simple grave. As for the economic side of things, the cost of a proper Viking funeral could easily deplete a family's resources. A Viking longship required skilled craftsmanship, and the best ones could be up to 75 feet long, carrying around 60 men. Constructing such a vessel wasn't a weekend DIY project, it took time, expertise and resources like timber and iron. And then there was the matter of the grave goods, items placed with the deceased for use in the afterlife. These could range from weapons and jewellery to everyday tools and, in some cases, sacrificed animals or even humans. The more extravagant the burial, the more it signalled the deceased's status in life and, presumably, in the afterlife. Despite the romantic notion of a grand send-off, the practicalities of Viking funerals were often dictated by what the family could afford. It's worth noting that while some Vikings were sent on their final voyage in style, others were laid to rest in simpler graves, sometimes with just a few personal belongings. The archaeological evidence, like the famous Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials, gives us glimpses into these practices, but also highlights the variability based on social status and wealth. So, as we unravel the layers of Viking funerals, remember that the legends are only part of the story. Behind every myth of a blazing ship, there's a reality grounded in economic necessity and cultural symbolism. The Vikings, with their deep connection to the sea, crafted a narrative in death that mirrored their life's journey, navigating the waters of both the real and the mythical. As we continue to explore their world, it becomes clear that the Viking Age was as much about the stories they left behind as it was about the adventures they lived. The notion of a Viking funeral conjures images of grandeur, a burning ship, perhaps a few mournful notes from a horn and a warrior's soul drifting to Valhalla. But let's hit pause on that cinematic montage and dig into the reality, which, much like a Norse winter, was a bit more grounded. The truth is, Viking burial practices were as varied as they were practical, with a healthy dose of social politics thrown in. First up, let's talk about the ship burials. Yes, they were real, and yes, they were impressive. But not in the way Hollywood might have you believe. A proper ship burial was about social status, not pyrotechnics. The archaeological finds at Oseberg and Gokstad in Norway are prime examples of these elaborate send-offs. The Oseberg ship, discovered in 1904, was the final resting place of two women, possibly of noble status, surrounded by a wealth of grave goods that included a cart, sledges, and even intricately carved animal heads. Talk about going out with style. But here's the kicker. These ships weren't sent off to sea. They were buried on land, carefully set within burial mounds. The whole fire on the water routine? That was as rare as a snowstorm in July. Now, why bury a perfectly good ship? It boils down to a simple matter of prestige. Ships were a symbol of power and wealth. Owning one was like having a personal jet today, and burying one with the deceased was akin to saying, look how important they were. It was a way to cement social standing even in death. But remember, only the elite could afford such displays. Your average Viking might have been laid to rest with a few personal trinkets and a modest mound. And let's not forget the economic implications. Constructing a ship was no small feat. Craftsmanship, resources, and manpower were needed, and not everyone could afford to divert these from daily survival. A well-built longship could cost a fortune in terms of timber alone, not to mention the labour of skilled craftsmen who knew their way around a saw and an axe. For those who couldn't foot the bill, simpler inhumations were the norm. These could range from shallow graves marked by stones to more elaborate setups involving stone chambers or wooden coffins. Now, a word on the practicality of setting ships on fire. Imagine trying to set a wooden vessel ablaze on the open sea. Sounds romantic, right? But in reality, it would require a ton of resources: wood, pitch, kindling, and more than a little luck with the weather. And here's a fun fact. Archaeologists have found evidence of cremated remains in some Viking graves, but not necessarily with charred ship remnants. This suggests that while cremation was part of the tradition, the Hollywood version with a boat on fire might have been more fiction than fact. So, what's the deal with cremation then? It was a popular practice among the Vikings, but again, it was all about status and symbolism. A cremation involved a pyre, usually on land, with the deceased and their grave goods set ablaze. The ashes were then collected and either buried or scattered. This was a practical way to honour the dead when a full-blown ship burial wasn't feasible. Plus, it was a nod to the belief in the transformative power of fire, a way to aid the spirit's journey to the afterlife. But wait, there's more. Viking funerals weren't just about honouring the dead, they were also about the living. These events were communal affairs, bringing together family, friends, and even rivals. It was an opportunity for the living to affirm alliances, settle scores, and perhaps make a power play or two. In a time when politics was as much about personal relationships as it was about warfare, a funeral could be a strategic gathering. Picture this. A chieftain's funeral could see leaders from surrounding areas in attendance, each eyeing the proceedings while subtly gauging shifts in power dynamics. It was Game of Thrones before it was cool. This political manoeuvring extended to the choice of grave goods as well. What you took to the afterlife said a lot about who you were or who your family wanted you to be remembered as. Weapons, jewellery, and even livestock were common, each serving as a testament to the deceased's life and legacy. But here's the twist. These items also served as a statement to those left behind, a way to flex familial wealth and influence. And then there's the matter of human sacrifice. Yep, you heard that right. Some Viking funerals reportedly included thralls, servants or slaves, who were sacrificed to accompany their master to the next world. The Arab traveller Ahmad ibn Fadlan famously described such a practice in the 10th century, though it's important to note that archaeological evidence for human sacrifice in Viking burials is sparse. Most scholars agree that while it may have occurred, it wasn't as widespread as legends suggest. Still, the very idea adds a macabre twist to our understanding of the Viking afterlife beliefs. Speaking of beliefs, let's touch on the spiritual side of things. Viking funerals were deeply rooted in Norse mythology, where the afterlife was a journey, not a destination. The concept of Valhalla, Odin's Hall of the Slain, is well known, but not every Viking aimed for this warrior's paradise. There were other afterlife destinations, like Hell, presided over by the goddess Hel, which wasn't the fiery underworld pop culture sometimes makes it out to be. In fact, it was more of a neutral zone for those who died of old age or illness. Basically, the Nordic version of a quiet retirement village. So there you have it. Viking funerals were a complex blend of practicality, social status, and mythology. Behind the legendary tales lies a world where the realities of life and death were intertwined with economic necessity and political strategy. As we continue to unravel the layers of Viking history, it's clear that their funerals were as multifaceted as their lives, rich in tradition, yet deeply rooted in the harsh realities of their time. And as for those fiery ship send-offs, well, they make for a great story, but the truth, as always, is far more intriguing. As we continue our deep dive into the Viking afterlife, let's shift gears a bit and explore the cultural and religious significance of those epic send-offs. You see, Viking funerals weren't just about making a splash, though they certainly did that. These rites were an intoxicating mix of pagan traditions and the first whispers of Christianity, much like a cocktail of mead and holy water. The Vikings, ever the adaptable folk, were navigating a world in transition, caught between the old gods of Asgard and the new deity on the block, Jesus Christ. The Viking Age, roughly 793 to 166 AD, was a time of great change, not just in terms of raiding and trading, but also in belief systems. Scandinavia was a cultural melting pot where pagan practices collided head-on with the spread of Christianity. This religious evolution was reflected in their funerary customs, which often resembled a theological tug-of-war. The Skalds, those Viking hype men of yore, played a key role here. These Norse poets and storytellers were like the medieval equivalent of rock stars, shaping the legacy of the deceased with their verses. They ensured that the names of mighty warriors and sagacious leaders echoed through the mead halls long after their bodies had turned to dust. Now, about those skalds, they were the original spin doctors. Picture them weaving tales as intricate as a Norse knot, turning the deeds of the deceased into epic sagas worthy of the Eddas. Their stories were not just about glorifying the departed, they were also a way to guide the living. The sagas painted a picture of what it meant to be a good Viking, brave, honourable and generous. It was basically the Viking answer to a self-help book, with a bit more swordplay and fewer motivational quotes. But back to the funerals. While the Skalds were busy singing the praises of the dead, the living were grappling with a shifting religious landscape. The influence of Christianity was creeping into the Viking world like a stealthy raider. By the end of the Viking Age, many Scandinavians had converted, and this new faith was leaving its mark on funeral practices. The pagan rituals of longboats and pyres were gradually giving way to Christian burials, where the body was laid to rest in a coffin, oriented east-west, facing the rising sun, a nod to Christ's resurrection. Yet, old habits die hard. In some cases, you could find graves with a curious blend of Christian symbols and pagan grave goods, as if the deceased were hedging their bets in the afterlife. And speaking of hedging bets, let's talk about human sacrifice. Ah, the gory detail. Everyone loves to bring up when talking about Vikings. It's true that some accounts, like those of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, describe thralls being sacrificed during funerals. But before you start picturing bloodthirsty rituals on every Scandinavian fjord, let's set the record straight. Archaeological evidence suggests that human sacrifices were more of an exception than the norm. Most scholars agree that while such practices might have occurred, they were far from widespread. It was more of a you-had-to-be-there kind of situation, reserved for specific occasions and high-status individuals. So why does the myth of rampant human sacrifice persist? Well, it's the same reason why everyone thinks Vikings wore horned helmets. They didn't, by the way. Myths are sticky. They capture the imagination and refuse to let go, much like that one persistent piece of gum on your favorite shoe. The idea of human sacrifice adds an exotic, savage twist to the Viking narrative, one that's hard to resist even if it's not entirely factual. But back to the cultural context. The Vikings were pragmatic people, and their funerals reflected that practicality. The pagan elements like grave goods and ship burials were deeply rooted in the belief that the afterlife was a continuation of earthly life, just with fewer invasions. You'd need your weapons, tools, and maybe a horse or two to get by in Valhalla or Hell. But as Christianity spread, the focus shifted. The afterlife became more about spiritual salvation than material preparation. This wasn't just a religious shift, it was a social one too. As Christianity took hold, it brought with it new social norms and structures that reshaped Viking society. And what about the economics of it all? Viking funerals were a costly affair, both in terms of materials and manpower. The construction of burial mounds, the crafting of grave goods, and the feasting that accompanied a funeral all required resources. It was, in many ways, an investment in the family's social capital. A lavish funeral could elevate a family's status, reinforce alliances, and ensure that the deceased was remembered favourably. But as Christianity took root, the showy funerals gradually gave way to simpler burials, reflecting the religion's emphasis on humility and spiritual wealth over earthly riches. So, while the Vikings might have been pillaging and plundering across Europe, back home they were wrestling with complex questions of faith and identity. Their funerals were a mirror of these societal changes, a testament to a people caught between two worlds. The Skalds, with their tales of gods and heroes, helped bridge the gap, ensuring that the stories of old didn't fade away. They crafted a narrative that was as much about the past as it was about the future. As we continue to unravel the Viking Age, it becomes clear that their funerals were more than just a farewell to the dead. They were a reflection of a society in flux, navigating the turbulent waters of change with the same skill they navigated their legendary longships. And as we delve deeper into the saga of Viking funerals, we find that the truth is richer and more complex than any myth. An epic tale where the romance of legend meets the stark reality of history. Stay tuned as we continue this journey into the world of the Vikings, where the line between myth and reality is as fluid as the seas they once sailed. So, as we sail further into the foggy waters of Viking funerals, let's drop the anchor right at the heart of the myths that have tantalized storytellers for centuries. First up, the Hollywood darling, the Viking warrior's death wish and the inevitable cruise to Valhalla. Picture this, a fearless Viking, sword in hand, charging into battle with a gleam in his eye that screams, Valhalla or bust. It's a compelling image, but like most good tales, it's about as nuanced as a hammer to the head. Here's the reality. While the idea of dying gloriously in battle to secure a spot in Odin's hall sounds epic, not every Viking was itching for a one-way ticket to Valhalla. Sure, for warriors, dying in combat was the golden ticket. Think of it as the Norse equivalent of making it to the Hall of Fame. Valhalla was the VIP lounge, where the beer never ran dry, and the company was legendary. But this was largely a warrior-centric narrative, not a universal aspiration across Viking society. Farmers, traders, and artisans weren't necessarily hacking away at each other for a chance to drink mead with the gods. For many, surviving till the ripe old age of 40 was achievement enough. But why did this myth gain such traction? Because it's a story that sells, pure and simple. The allure of a warrior's paradise fits like a glove with the image of the Viking as the ultimate badass. In a way, it's Viking Marketing 101, a narrative that bolstered the warrior ethos and kept the metaphorical fire burning in the hearts of young Norsemen. And, as with any good marketing, it had staying power. This narrative was so potent that it continued to echo through time, finding fertile ground in later centuries when people needed tales of heroism and valor. Now, speaking of echoing through time, let's talk about the societal pressures that moulded these beliefs. The Viking Age wasn't just about pillaging and plundering, it was a society structured around reputation, honour, and social standing. In a world where your status was as fragile as a ship in a storm, tales of heroic deeds served as social currency. Imagine the pressure, a young Viking lad sitting by the fire, listening to the Skalds spin tales of legendary warriors and thinking, I better make a name for myself or end up as the village nobody. The myth of Valhalla wasn't just about the afterlife, it was a motivational tool, urging individuals to strive for greatness in this life to secure their legacy in the next. But what happens when these tales of valor cross borders and centuries? They get co-opted, repackaged, and sometimes weaponized for political and cultural gain. Fast forward to the 19th century, when the romantic image of the noble Viking was resurrected by nationalists seeking to craft a proud, unified identity. In Scandinavia, where the echoes of the Viking Age were still felt, These stories were polished and presented as a golden age of Nordic strength and independence. The Vikings became cultural icons, a symbol of a proud history that could rally people together, especially in times of political upheaval. And beyond Scandinavia, the Viking myth found new life. Take the Nazis, for instance. They were all about appropriating symbols of strength and purity, and the Vikings, with their perceived racial superiority and warrior ethos, fit the bill perfectly. It's a dark twist in the saga, but it highlights how these myths can be twisted to serve darker agendas. It's the ultimate irony: the Vikings, who were pragmatic traders and raiders, became the poster boys for ideologies they probably never heard of. But let's steer back to the lighter side of pop culture. Thanks to Hollywood, the Viking warrior and his fiery funeral have become iconic. Films and TV shows, from Kirk Douglas's 1958 romp in The Vikings to more recent portrayals in series like Vikings, have perpetuated the idea of the noble Norseman sailing into the sunset on a flaming longship. These portrayals, while entertaining, have often taken liberties with historical facts, blending fantasy with reality in a way that leaves the audience both thrilled and misled. And let's not forget the horned helmets. A great accessory for a costume party, but not exactly period accurate. The myth of the horned helmet has been debunked by historians more times than you can say, Ragnar Lodbrok, yet it persists, probably because it's just too darn cool to let go. It's a reminder that sometimes the stories we love to tell say more about us than about the people who lived them. So, where does that leave us? With a tapestry of myth and reality that's as intricate as a Viking brooch. The enduring impact of these narratives is a testament to their power, not just as stories of a long-gone era, but as cultural touchstones that continue to shape identities and imaginations. The Vikings understood the art of storytelling, and their sagas have left an indelible mark on history. As we prepare to continue our journey, remember that while the myths are captivating, the truth, with all its complexities and contradictions, is even more so. The Vikings were masters of navigating both the seas and the stories that defined them. So, stay tuned as we venture deeper into the world they left behind, where the line between legend and reality is as elusive as a Norse ghost ship disappearing into the mist. So, as we sail further into the foggy waters of Viking funerals, let's switch gears and look at why these ancient send-offs have such a grip on our modern imagination. It's one thing to admire the Norse knack for a dramatic farewell, but why are we still so captivated by them today? Spoiler alert, it's got less to do with actual Viking history and more with how we've culturally rebranded them over the centuries. Take a stroll through the realms of modern entertainment and you'll see Viking funerals popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. From heavy metal album covers to HBO's ratings juggernauts, they're everywhere. Why? Because these epic farewells tap into our universal fascination with death and what lies beyond. The Vikings, with their flamboyant send-offs, offer a narrative that's both grand and deeply human. It's a story of warriors facing mortality not with a whimper, but with a blaze of glory. And who doesn't love a good blaze? Let's start with metal music. If there's a genre that revels in the drama of life and death, it's metal. And Viking imagery? It's like catnip for bands looking to channel power and defiance. Bands like Amon Amarth and Bathory have built entire discographies around Norse mythology and its apocalyptic aesthetics. The allure? A Viking funeral provides the ultimate stage for the themes of honor, sacrifice, and the relentless march into the unknown. Plus, nothing screams epic, quite like a flaming longship on an album cover. It's a visceral callback to a time when facing death was as much about the spectacle as it was about the afterlife. And then there's television. Shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom have brought these Norse narratives into living rooms worldwide, each episode a blend of historical fact and creative license. It's the perfect mix, a dash of historical realism, a sprinkle of dramatic tension, and a whole lot of scenic longships. These series capture the imagination by portraying Viking society as one of bold explorers, fierce warriors, and, yes, extravagant funerals. It's this blend of history and myth that keeps viewers hooked, even if it means sacrificing a little factual accuracy along the way. But what's the economic angle here? Well, the commercialization of Viking culture has been a goldmine. From merchandise to theme parks, the Viking brand is a lucrative one. It's ironic, really, The Vikings, who once raided for wealth, are now a source of it. And while they may not have planned it this way, they've become the poster children for how historical myth can translate into modern profit. It's a fitting legacy for a culture that knew the value of resourcefulness. And let's not forget the deeper, philosophical pull of these stories. Viking funerals remind us of the human quest for meaning in the face of mortality. In an age where we often shield ourselves from death's reality, the Viking approach is refreshingly direct. They embrace the end as another adventure, a journey to be met with courage and ceremony. It's a narrative that resonates, offering a sense of purpose and closure that's often missing in our sanitized views of death today. This fascination isn't new, of course. It's been simmering for centuries, ever since the Romantics of the 19th century rediscovered the Vikings as symbols of noble savagery. In an era of industrialization and rapid change, the Vikings offered an idealized past, a simpler time when life's struggles were met with valor and a good axe. This romanticism has persisted, morphing with each generation to suit contemporary needs. It's like a historical game of telephone where each retelling adds a new layer to the narrative. But let's not kid ourselves. The myths are just that, myths. They paint the Vikings as larger-than-life figures, but the reality was far more nuanced. The Vikings were pragmatic people. Their funerals, a reflection of both societal norms and economic constraints. Not every Viking got a fiery farewell, and not every soul sailed to Valhalla. Yet, it's the legends that endure, shaping our perceptions and fueling our fantasies. So, as we wrap up this saga of Viking funerals, what's the takeaway? The Vikings have left us with a legacy that's as much about storytelling as it is about history. Their funerals, with their mix of grandeur and grit, remind us of the complex dance between life and death. They challenge us to face our mortality with the same boldness they did, to make our farewells as meaningful as our lives. And in a world that's constantly changing, that's a lesson that never goes out of style. The Vikings understood that a good story is worth its weight in gold. And by turning their funerals into epic narratives, they've ensured their tales will be told for generations to come. It's not just about the ships and the flames, it's about the indomitable spirit they represent. So, next time you hear a power chord or see a longship on screen, remember the real story behind the spectacle. It's not just about what happens when the flames die down, but what burns bright in the telling. In the world of ancient Egypt, medicine was a curious cocktail of science and sorcery, where doctors, or soignois as they were called, played the dual roles of physician and wizard. Picture these folks as the original multitaskers of the Nile, trying to balance the scales of the human body with a mix of herbal remedies and magic spells. And while they might not have been handing out prescriptions for kale smoothies, their methods were surprisingly sophisticated for their time. Let's start with the Swan, Egypt's professional physicians. These guys were no amateurs. They trained meticulously, often in temples that doubled as the era's medical schools. The training took years, and if you think med school is tough now, imagine learning to write prescriptions in hieroglyphs. These symbols weren't just for decorating tombs, they were the lifeline of medical communication. The Egyptians were nothing if not thorough, and their doctors were expected to master both the practical and the mystical. One of the oldest medical texts in existence, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, is practically a field guide to ancient Egyptian surgery. Dating back to around 1600 BCE, this document is a treasure trove of information, detailing surgical procedures, diagnoses, and treatments. But here's the kicker. It's named after an American antiquities dealer who bought it in the 19th century. Not exactly what you'd call an ancient Egyptian name. The papyrus contains 48 case studies that range from head injuries to spinal cord damage. Each case is laid out with a description, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. It's like the ultimate ancient guidebook for the Egyptian ER. The Egyptians had a holistic approach to medicine that would make today's wellness gurus green with envy. They believed the body was a system of channels like the Nile, and any blockage could cause disease. So, they treated illnesses with a mix of practical remedies and incantations. Herbal medicine was the order of the day, with ingredients sourced from their rich natural environment. Garlic and onions were popular prescriptions, perfect for keeping the undead and unwanted dinner guests away. But it wasn't all about herbs and chants. The Egyptians were big on cleanliness, a trait that likely influenced their medical practice. They understood that hygiene played a critical role in preventing infections, which is pretty impressive considering they were operating thousands of years before the germ theory of disease. Bathing was a daily ritual, and they used natron, a naturally occurring salt, as a soap. While it might not have been Dove or Dial, it got the job done. Now, let's talk about the magical side of things. The Egyptians didn't just rely on the scientific, they infused their treatments with a hefty dose of religion and superstition. Gods like Thoth and Isis were often invoked in healing spells, and amulets were used to ward off illness. It's kind of like putting your faith in both doctors and the divine, just in case one of them doesn't show up to your appointment. In terms of actual practice, Egyptian medicine was a community affair. Physicians were ranked and specialized, with some focusing on specific parts of the body. Think of them as the original specialists. There were eye doctors, dentists, and even proctologists. Yes, you heard that right. The Egyptians had a doctor for every orifice and ailment, proving that even in ancient times, no job was too small. Despite their reliance on magic, the Egyptians were surprisingly empirical. They observed symptoms and outcomes, gradually building a body of knowledge that was highly respected throughout the ancient world. Greek historian Herodotus even called Egyptian physicians the best of their time, which, coming from the Greeks, is high praise indeed. While the romantic image of a mystical land where health was a blend of chants and charms is tempting, the reality was a bit more grounded. The Egyptians were pioneers, pushing the boundaries of what was known about the human body. They were the original experimenters, not afraid to mix a little hocus-pocus with their hard-earned knowledge. In the end, ancient Egyptian medicine was a unique blend of the practical and the mystical, a testament to a culture that sought to understand the world through both observation and belief. It was a system that worked for centuries, and while we might not be ready to swap our modern hospitals for temples just yet, there's something to be said for the Egyptians' commitment to healing, both body and soul. So, speaking of the Egyptians' commitment to healing, let's dive into their anatomical adventures. Picture the scene: ancient Egyptian doctors, scalpels in hand, standing over a patient, ready to work their magic, or as close to magic as surgical tools in the 16th century BCE could get. Their understanding of anatomy was a curious mix of observation and imagination, kind of like a high-stakes game of operation without the buzzing sound. First up, the Egyptians had a peculiar take on the body's internal highways. They believed the body was a series of interconnected channels. Think of it as the original subway map of the human form. This idea wasn't completely off the mark. These channels were thought to carry air, water, and blood, and any blockage could lead to illness. In a way, they were groping toward the concept of circulation, even if they hadn't quite nailed down the specifics. Now, about those surgical practices. Ancient Egyptian doctors weren't just fumbling around with leeches and poultices, they were surprisingly sophisticated. Thanks to the Edwin Smith papyrus, we know they performed surgeries that would raise eyebrows today, like treating wounds, setting fractures, and even brain surgery. Yes, you heard that right. They attempted cranial surgery, a feat that makes modern acupuncture look like a day at the spa. Imagine the kind of grit it took to chisel into a skull, with tools that were probably closer to a blacksmith's toolkit than a modern surgeon's array of shiny implements. Speaking of tools, the Egyptians had quite the arsenal. Surgical instruments made of bronze and copper were the order of the day. They had knives, hooks, drills, forceps, and even a tool akin to a scalpel. It's like the ancient version of a Swiss army knife, only with a bit more rust and a lot more daring. And while some of these procedures might sound like medieval torture devices, they were often effective. Patients survived, and they didn't even have the luxury of anesthesia. Just grit your teeth and think happy thoughts, right? Now, let's talk about the Egyptians' take on the circulatory system, which is where things get a bit more creative. While they knew the heart was crucial, kind of like the CEO of the body, they didn't quite get how it all worked. Instead of blood coursing through veins and arteries, they thought air flowed through the body's channels. The heart was seen as the epicenter of life and thought. Forget the brain in ancient Egypt, the heart was where it was at. Decisions, emotions, intellect. It all supposedly stemmed from this hard-working organ. In fact, the heart was so important that during mummification it was the only organ left inside the body believed to be necessary for the afterlife. The brain, on the other hand, didn't get the same VIP treatment. It was often scooped out and discarded like yesterday's news. To the Egyptians, it was more of a space filler than a control centre. Who needs a brain when you've got a heart, right? Despite these anatomical liberties, the Egyptians weren't just making stuff up. Their observations were based on real experiences, and they built a body of knowledge that was admired across the ancient world. They knew a lot about bones, muscles and organs, even if they got a bit creative with their functions. Their approach was a blend of empirical observation and imaginative speculation. An ancient TED talk on anatomy, if you will. Economically, medicine was a significant part of Egyptian society too. Doctors weren't just revered healers, they were professionals with a business model. Pharaohs and the elite would have their own personal physicians, a kind of ancient Egyptian concierge medicine. For the average Joe, or rather, the average Tut medical treatment was a communal affair, with local healers serving the needs of the populace. The medical profession was well respected, and a good physician could make a tidy sum, though they were probably paid in grain, linens or livestock rather than gold coins. Politically, the role of doctors was also intertwined with the state. Physicians often worked in temples, which were the epicenters of both religious and medical knowledge. They were essentially the ancient world's version of a hospital cum university. The priests held the keys to both spiritual and physical health, a dual monopoly that kept them firmly in power. So, while we might laugh at the idea of a heart-centric view of anatomy or the brain being dismissed as useless, it's essential to appreciate the Egyptians' pioneering spirit. Their blend of science and spirituality set the stage for future advances, even if their theories sometimes took a detour through the realm of fantasy. The Egyptians were nothing if not original, and their approach to the human body was a testament to their curiosity and ingenuity. In the end, ancient Egyptian medicine was an intricate dance of observation, innovation, and tradition. They may not have had all the answers, but they asked the right questions, paving the way for future generations to fill in the gaps. So, while we might not look to them for the latest medical breakthroughs, there's no denying their place in the annals of medical history, a complex tapestry woven with threads of both reality and myth. So, speaking of the Egyptians' love affair with mixing science and magic, let's delve into their pharmaceutical prowess, a blend of DIY enthusiasm and, let's be honest, a few eye-watering concoctions. These guys were like the original apothecaries, whipping up remedies in their ancient kitchens with a flair that would make any modern-day pharmacist do a double-take. Now, let's talk about the Ebers Papyrus, the ancient world's version of WebMD, minus the ominous warnings that you might have some rare disease. Dating around 1550 BCE, this papyrus is like the ultimate cookbook for Egyptian healers, filled with recipes that range from the genuinely useful to the downright bizarre. Picture this, over 700 magical formulas and remedies, covering everything from crocodile bites to bad breath. You heard that right, these ancient folks were just as concerned with morning mouth as we are. One of the Egyptian favourites was honey, not just for sweetening your tea, but as a staple in their medical arsenal. And they were onto something. Honey's antibacterial properties are legit. The Egyptians used it to treat wounds and soothe sore throats, making it the ancient equivalent of Neosporin. But honey wasn't just slathered on willy-nilly, it was often mixed with other ingredients like herbs and fats to create ointments. Imagine a balm of honey, animal fat and herbs, kind of like the ultimate ancient spa treatment, minus the cucumber slices. And speaking of herbs, the Egyptians had a veritable whole food's worth of them. They used coriander, cumin, and fennel, not just for spicing up their falafel, but to treat ailments like digestive issues and headaches. Let's face it, if you could cure a headache with a pinch of coriander instead of popping an Advil, you'd probably give it a shot, right? But not all their remedies were so palatable. Enter the cringe-worthy concoctions. Take, for instance, the use of crocodile dung. That's right, the Egyptians sometimes used the excrement of these river monsters in remedies, presumably mixing it with other ingredients to create treatments that were more bark than bite. It's a bit like trying to make a smoothie with kale and forgetting to take the stems off. The Evers Papyrus also gives us a glimpse into the economic side of ancient medicine. You might be wondering, how much did it cost to get your hands on a jar of that honey-laden ointment? Well, the economy of ancient Egypt wasn't exactly running on dollars and cents. Barter was the name of the game. Medicine was often exchanged for goods like grain, textiles, or even livestock. Imagine trading a goat for a jar of honey balm. It's like the original barter economy, and it kept the wheels of commerce turning. And then there's the political angle. Medicine was a tool of power, wielded by the elite to maintain control. Physicians were often close to the pharaohs, serving not just as healers, but as advisors. The ability to cure, or at least alleviate ailments, was a form of influence, and being able to keep the ruling class healthy was a surefire way to stay on the good side of those in power. Yet, for all their wisdom, the Egyptians weren't immune to a bit of superstition. Many remedies were accompanied by spells or chants, calling on the gods to aid the healing process. It's a bit like hedging your bets with both science and faith. Can't hurt to cover all your bases, right? In the grand tapestry of history, the Egyptians' approach to medicine is a testament to their ingenuity and resourcefulness. They weren't afraid to experiment, to mix the sacred with the practical, and to use whatever tools they had at their disposal. Whether it was honey, herbs, or even crocodile dung, they were the ultimate DIY enthusiasts, crafting remedies that, while sometimes questionable, were a testament to their commitment to healing. So, if you're ever feeling adventurous, take a page from the Egyptians' book and try a little honey on your next cut. Just maybe skip the crocodile dung. As we continue exploring their medical marvels, remember, these were people who dared to ask questions and weren't afraid of the answers they found, no matter how strange they might seem today. Now, let's dive into the spiritual side of Egyptian medicine, where the line between faith and physiology was blurrier than your vision after a few too many cups of ancient beer. In ancient Egypt, healing wasn't just about slapping on a honey poultice and hoping for the best, it was also about invoking the power of the gods. The Egyptians were experts at multitasking, and their temple physicians doubled as priests, seamlessly fusing medicine with mysticism. Imagine the grandeur of the temples, these colossal structures that were the epicenters of both religion and healing. They weren't just places of worship, but also the ancient world's equivalent of a hospital. If your local ER had hieroglyphs carved into its walls and a mandatory offering to the gods before treatment, these temples were dedicated to deities like Imhotep, the god of medicine and healing, and yes, the same Imhotep who was an actual person before being deified. Talk about a career milestone. Go from being a royal architect and physician to being worshipped as a god. It's like getting a promotion, only with a lot more incense and rituals. In these hallowed halls, the power of belief was a crucial component of the healing process. The Egyptians were firm believers in the placebo effect, even if they didn't quite have the terminology for it. Sometimes just believing you were cured was half the battle, a concept that's still kicking around today with our sugar pill studies and wellness retreats. And while it might sound like a cop-out, the Egyptians were onto something. The mind is a powerful tool, and the ancient Egyptians wielded it like a master craftsman with a chisel. These temple physicians, or wab priests, were the ultimate double agents. They had one foot firmly planted in the realm of science, diagnosing and treating ailments with a mixture of herbal remedies and surgical procedures. The other foot was in the world of the spiritual, where they called upon gods like Hathor and Sekhmet to aid in their healing efforts. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing, was particularly popular, probably because if she didn't heal you, you'd at least get a cool story about being treated by a lioness deity. The Egyptians believed that illness could be caused by supernatural forces, angry gods, malevolent spirits, or curses. This wasn't just an excuse for why your neighbor's voodoo doll collection was making you feel off. It was a genuine belief that shaped their medical practices. To counter these supernatural ailments, they used an arsenal of spells and charms. These incantations were more than just mumbo-jumbo. They were carefully crafted pieces of verbal art, designed to soothe the soul and scare off any spiritual pests lurking around. Temple rituals often involved elaborate ceremonies with music, incense, and offerings. Picture it as the original holistic healing session, with a bit more smoke and a lot more chanting. The priests would recite spells from texts like the famous Book of the Dead or the Coffin texts, which, despite their macabre titles, were not about death, but about ensuring a safe passage to the afterlife and maintaining health in this life. One such incantation might involve invoking Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, to bring clarity and health. Or perhaps they'd call upon Isis, the motherly figure who was believed to possess great healing powers. The Egyptians didn't just pray, they negotiated with the gods, offering them food, drink, and devotion in exchange for their divine intervention. It's like trying to bribe your way into good health with a well-placed offering and a few heartfelt words. Economically, this blend of medicine and magic wasn't just a spiritual boon, but a financial one too. Temples were well-funded institutions, supported by the state and endowed with lands and resources. The priests and physicians who worked there were part of a privileged class, enjoying a status that came with both respect and responsibility. They were the keepers of sacred knowledge, the guardians of health, and the confidants of the gods. Talk about a full-time job with benefits. Politically, the temple's dual role in medicine and religion reinforced the power of the state. By controlling the spiritual and physical health of the population, the ruling class maintained a firm grip on society. The temple wasn't just a place of healing, it was a center of power, a place where the divine and the earthly met. It was here that the pharaohs, seen as gods on earth, would perform rituals to ensure the health and prosperity of the nation. These ceremonies weren't just for show, they were political theatre, designed to reinforce the divine right of the rulers and the stability of the state. Yet, for all their mystical trappings, the Egyptians were surprisingly practical when it came to health. They understood that while a good word with the gods couldn't hurt, it was best paired with a practical approach. This meant that alongside the incantations, there were real medical treatments, happening bandages, poultices, and surgeries that would make any modern-day doctor nod in appreciation. As we continue our journey through the sands of time, it's clear that the Egyptians were masters of blending the seen with the unseen. Their medicine was a testament to their ability to balance the tangible with the intangible, to draw on both the earthly and the ethereal. So, the next time you find yourself hoping for a little extra luck from the universe, remember the Egyptians and their belief in the power of both science and spirit. After all, in a world where the Nile could flood or recede on a whim, it paid to have friends in high places, even if those friends were gods with the heads of birds or lions. Just as the Egyptians knew the power of having divine allies, they also understood the importance of leaving a legacy that would echo through the ages. Their medical practices, a complex dance of science and spirituality, didn't just vanish into the sands with the pharaohs. Instead, they laid the groundwork for medical traditions that influenced the Greeks and Romans, and even us today. Let's start with the Greeks, who were like the ancient world's biggest fans of Egyptian medicine. We're talking about a culture that adored the idea of mixing science with spirituality almost as much as they adored their symposiums and philosophical debates. Hippocrates, often hailed as the father of modern medicine, borrowed heavily from Egyptian practices. The Greek doctors took notes, literally, and adapted Egyptian methods, adding their own spin. They learned about surgical techniques and herbal remedies, and then went on to write extensive medical texts that would become foundational in Western medicine. It's like taking the Egyptians' playlist and remixing it for a whole new audience. The Romans, never ones to pass up a good idea, latched onto these Greek interpretations of Egyptian medicine. Galen, a prominent Roman physician, was particularly enamored with the holistic approach the Egyptians had championed. He believed in balancing the humours of the body, a concept that echoed the Egyptian view of bodily channels, albeit with a little Roman flair. Galen's works would dominate Western medicine for over a millennium, proving that the Egyptians' influence was like a well-placed seed, blossoming long after the original gardeners were gone. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the Egyptians were pioneers, their legacy also included a fair share of hocus-pocus that didn't quite make the cut. Not every crocodile dung concoction or mystic chant found its way into the medical canon. The Greeks and Romans were selective, cherry-picking the most practical elements, while leaving some of the more, let's say, colourful practices by the wayside. Yet, the myth of the all-knowing, mystical Egyptian doctor persisted. Even today, people are fascinated by the idea of a civilization that seamlessly wove magic and medicine. It's a notion that appeals to our love of mystery and our eternal hope that there might be more to healing than just cold clinical science. But here's the kicker. The Egyptians were as pragmatic as they were mystical. They understood the value of empirical observation, and that's something that resonated with the Greeks and Romans, who were big fans of logic and reason. Well, most of the time. Economically speaking, the Egyptian influence also had its perks. The trade of medical knowledge became a form of intellectual commerce. Scrolls and papyri travelled alongside spices and silks, spreading Egyptian wisdom across the Mediterranean. This exchange wasn't cheap. Acquiring such knowledge was a costly affair, reserved for those who could afford it. It was an investment in health, a commodity as precious as any exotic good. Politically, the legacy of Egyptian medicine was a testament to the power of soft influence. By exporting their ideas and practices, the Egyptians extended their reach beyond the Nile. They didn't need to conquer lands to make their mark. Their ideas did the heavy lifting. It's a reminder that sometimes the pen, or in this case the papyrus, is mightier than the sword. Yet, for all the influence and innovation, there's a sobering truth. The Egyptians didn't have all the answers. Their understanding of anatomy, while impressive, was incomplete. Their spiritual practices, though comforting, didn't always cure. But they were relentless in their pursuit of knowledge, a trait that is as admirable today as it was millennia ago. They weren't afraid to experiment, to push boundaries, and to blend the seen with the unseen. It's a legacy of curiosity, a testament to the human spirit's unquenchable thirst for understanding. So, as we wrap up this journey through the annals of ancient Egyptian medicine, let's take a moment to appreciate the mix of myth and reality. The Egyptians were masters of their craft, innovators who dared to dream big. They left behind a legacy that has outlasted empires and resonated through time. Their story is one of faith and reason, of observation and imagination. And while we might not need a prescription for garlic and crocodile dung today, there's something to be said for their holistic approach to healing. A reminder that sometimes the best remedies come from a blend of science and a little bit of magic. In the end, Egyptian medicine is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a story of humanity's quest to understand itself, a journey that continues in every lab, hospital, and research centre today. So next time you're in the pharmacy aisle, remember the Egyptians, the original DIYers of the medical world. They didn't have all the answers, but they weren't afraid to ask the questions. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. The ancient Persian Empire, a sprawling domain of grandeur and mystery around 500 BCE, was a place where magic wasn't just a trick at the local bazaar. It was a way of life, as integral to the culture as those famously luxurious Persian rugs. Before Snapchat filters and Photoshop, alchemy and magic were the go-to for people hoping to turn the mundane into the extraordinary. And in these times, the Persian cities were the epicenters of this mystical tradition, with Persepolis standing proud as a beacon of learning and enchantment. Now, before you dismiss the idea of magic in ancient Persia as nothing more than a fairy tale, let's dive into the nitty-gritty. The Persian Empire, at its peak, stretched from the Balkans in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, an impressive expanse covering approximately 5 million square kilometers. That's right. Think of it as the Persian Empire's way of saying, "We got this." With such a vast territory, you can bet there was a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and, of course, magical practices. Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire, was the Hogwarts of its day. Built by Darius I and later expanded by his successors, this city was a marvel of architecture and design, complete with grand stone columns and intricate reliefs that would make any modern-day interior designer swoon. It was here that scholars, magicians, and alchemists gathered, sharing their knowledge and secrets like an ancient TED Talk, minus the laser pointers and PowerPoint slides. The allure of alchemy in Persia was more than just the dream of turning lead into gold, a feat even Harry Potter couldn't pull off. It was about understanding the universe's hidden secrets and harnessing the power of nature. The term alchemy itself comes from the Arabic word al-kaimiyya, which has its roots in ancient Greek and Egyptian traditions, but it was the Persians who added their unique spice to the mix, blending scientific inquiry with mystical exploration. Now, let's talk about magic. In ancient Persia, magic was as common as cats on the internet. It wasn't merely for entertainment, it was a respected discipline. The Magi, the Zoroastrian priests, were the OGs of magical practice. They were believed to have had the ability to communicate with the divine, interpret dreams, and even predict the future. So, if you ever needed a cosmic weather report or some guidance on whether to invest in that new chariot, the Magi were your go-to guys. But it wasn't all crystal balls and incantations. The Persians had a pragmatic side too. They understood that a little bit of mystique went a long way in maintaining power. The Persian kings, like Darius and Xerxes, were savvy enough to use the aura of divine favor and mystical prowess to keep their subjects in awe and line. The empire's success wasn't just built on military might and administrative efficiency. It was also crafted through the careful weaving of myth and reality. In the bustling streets of Persepolis, you would find bazaars filled with merchants selling everything from spices to amulets. These amulets weren't just fashion statements, they were believed to ward off evil spirits and bring good fortune. And while we might chuckle at the idea of a lucky charm today, back then these talismans were serious business. After all, who wouldn't want a little extra luck in a world where the next invasion or drought could be just around the corner? The Persians' love affair with magic wasn't just confined to the elite or the educated, it permeated all levels of society, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest noble. It was a unifying force, a shared language of belief that transcended the many cultures and peoples within the empire. So, while the Magi might have been the rock stars of the magical world, everyone had a part to play in the grand symphony of enchantment. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, or, in some cases, great superstition. The downside of a culture steeped in magic was that it could be used to justify almost anything. Can't explain a bad crop yield? Must be a curse? Feeling under the weather? Better check for hexes. This reliance on the supernatural could sometimes overshadow more practical solutions, but hey, nobody's perfect. Despite its mystical allure, the Persian Empire was also a place of scientific curiosity and innovation. The boundaries between magic, science, and religion were often blurred, creating a rich tapestry of ideas that would influence future civilizations. The exchange of knowledge between Greek, Egyptian, and Persian scholars laid the groundwork for many of the scientific advancements we take for granted today. In the end, the magic of ancient Persia wasn't just about the spells and potions. It was about a worldview that embraced wonder and curiosity, that sought to unravel the mysteries of existence through both earthly and celestial means. And while we may no longer rely on amulets to get us through a tough day, the legacy of Persian magic continues to enchant us, reminding us that sometimes a little bit of mystery is exactly what we need. While Persian magic cast its enchanting spell over society, the realm of alchemy was brewing its own brand of mystery, one that promised not just a good harvest or protection from evil spirits, but immortality itself. Yes, you heard that right. Immortality. The holy grail of ancient aspirations. In a world where life expectancy hovered around 35 years if you were lucky, the idea of living forever was more than just a pipe dream. It was the ultimate jackpot. Now, let's get one thing straight. The alchemists of ancient Persia weren't just basement-dwelling eccentrics fiddling with test tubes and muttering arcane phrases. These individuals were the scientific pioneers of their day, armed not with wands but with rudimentary lab equipment and a relentless curiosity. They were the ones willing to set their eyebrows on fire in the pursuit of knowledge. And pursue they did, with the fervour of a modern-day start-up founder chasing their first billion. But why immortality, you ask? Well, aside from the obvious perks of eternal life, the quest for immortality was fueled by a cocktail of religious belief, philosophical inquiry, and a dash of good old-fashioned economic pragmatism. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the concept of an eternal soul was already in the mix, so the jump to a forever young body wasn't too far-fetched. Plus, if you were a ruler who'd gone through the hassle of conquering half the known world, you'd probably want to stick around to enjoy it. The pursuit of eternal life wasn't just about drinking from some mystical fountain. It was a full-on research project, involving a disciplined and systematic approach. Persian alchemists, like the legendary Zosimos of Panopolis, who, despite his Greek name, was heavily influenced by Persian traditions, were in the business of transforming not just substances, but the very essence of human existence. They dabbled in everything from herbal concoctions to exotic minerals, seeking that elusive elixir of life. It was like the ancient equivalent of a wellness retreat, minus the yoga pants and Instagram posts. Of course, the quest for immortality wasn't a low-budget affair. We're talking about a significant investment in raw materials, labour, and time. The Persians were savvy enough to understand that you can't just slack together a few ingredients and call it a cure for death. Precious metals, rare herbs, and even substances like mercury, which we now know is more likely to shorten your life than extend it, were all part of the alchemist's toolkit. The economic impact was significant. Resources that could have been used for more immediately beneficial pursuits were instead funneled into this grand experiment. But it wasn't just about living forever. Alchemy had another tantalizing prospect, the creation of gold. Ah, gold. The shiny metal that has launched 1,000 quests and caused more than a few family feuds. For the ancients, gold was more than just a status symbol. It was the economic lifeblood of empires. It funded armies, built palaces, and greased the wheels of diplomacy. So, the notion of turning base metals into gold wasn't just a fantastical dream, it was a potential game-changer for anyone who cracked the code. Creating gold was the carrot on the alchemist's stick, dangling tantalizingly out of reach. The process involved complex reactions, bizarre ingredients, and the kind of patience usually reserved for watching paint dry. Despite the odds, Persian alchemists pressed on, driven by the promise of untold riches and the eternal glory of having solved the ultimate riddle of nature. In this light, alchemists weren't just peddlers of dreams. They were the R&D department of the ancient world, blending chemistry with philosophy in a crucible of ambition. But here's where reality gives the romantic image a swift kick in the pants. While the legend of the philosopher's stone capable of turning any metal into gold captured imaginations, the actual success rate was a solid 0%. Instead of gold, alchemists often ended up with a gooey mess or an explosive surprise that could rival any modern-day chemistry experiment gone wrong. Yet, the failures were as valuable as any supposed success. They laid the groundwork for future scientific inquiry, teaching invaluable lessons about the natural world and the limits of human ingenuity. This trial-and-error method, while charmingly chaotic, was the precursor to the scientific method we know today. Alchemists meticulously recorded their experiments, noting what worked, what didn't, and occasionally what exploded. These early scientists were part of a long tradition of inquiry that would eventually lead to the more structured disciplines of chemistry and physics. So, while they may not have achieved their lofty goals, they paved the way for those who came after, proving that even in failure there is progress. Now, if you're wondering how this all ties into the grand tapestry of Persian society, consider this. The pursuit of alchemical goals was as much about power and prestige as it was about scientific curiosity. The Persian elite, from kings to high priests, were often the patrons of these alchemical endeavors. They supplied the funds and resources not just out of altruism, but because the potential payoff was enormous. Imagine being the king who cracked the secret to gold creation or eternal life. Your legacy would be, quite literally, set in stone. But let's not get carried away with the romanticism. The economic reality was that alchemy was a risky investment. Resources poured into these projects could have been used to bolster military defenses, improve infrastructure, or feed the populace. The allure of alchemy, with its promise of infinite wealth and life, had to be balanced against the harsh realities of empire management. It was a delicate dance between dream and duty, with the stakes as high as the ambitions. In the end, alchemy in ancient Persia was a fascinating blend of myth, magic, and science. It was a testament to the human spirit's unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and the optimism that, even in the face of repeated failure, something wonderful might yet be discovered. While the alchemists never quite managed to turn lead into gold or distill the elixir of life, their legacy endures. They remind us that the pursuit of the impossible is what drives progress, even if the journey is fraught with setbacks and singed eyebrows. As we leave the bustling labs of ancient Persia behind, it's clear that the story of alchemy is far from over. In the next chapter, we'll delve deeper into the societal and political implications of these pursuits, exploring how the quest for the impossible shaped not just the Persian Empire, but the very course of history. So, stay tuned for more alchemical adventures, where we'll continue to unravel the mysteries of the past with a healthy dose of humor and a dash of skepticism. And so, as we bid farewell to the alchemical labs of ancient Persia, our narrative swerves to the political stage, where the real magic, if we can call it that, took place. Picture this. Persian rulers weren't just content with military brawn or governmental savvy. Nope, they had another card up their sleeves, the mystical allure of magic. In a world where divine favor was the ultimate endorsement, you can bet that a little magical PR went a long way. Enter the Magi, the Zoroastrian priests with a penchant for dazzling robes and cosmic prophecies. These guys were more than just spiritual guides. They were the ancient equivalent of a PR firm, spinning tales of divine intervention and celestial destiny to keep the empire's wheels well greased. Sure, the Magi had their mystical mumbo-jumbo, but they also knew how to play the political game. They were masters at crafting narratives that could elevate a ruler from mere mortal to God's chosen agent on earth. Let's dissect the role of these robed maestros. The Magi were part of a powerful priestly class who claimed to interpret the will of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. With the empire spanning 5 million square kilometers, having a direct hotline to the divine wasn't just a perk, it was a necessity. These priests wielded influence like a Kardashian wields social media, using their supposed divine insights to sway decisions and legitimize royal power. Now, before we get too carried away with the mystical imagery, let's ask the hard question. Were the Magi really magical beings, or just savvy spin doctors? It's a bit of both, really. While the ancient texts are rife with tales of the Magi's supernatural feats, a more skeptical eye sees them as astute political operators. They were the ones whispering in the ears of kings like Cyrus and Darius, ensuring that every military conquest and administrative decree was wrapped in a cloak of divine approval. Take, for instance, the famous Magophonia, an annual festival supposedly celebrating the defeat of the false king Gaumata, an event shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Herodotus, the Greek historian, tells us that Gaumata, a Magian impostor, seized the throne by impersonating Bardia, the brother of King Cambyses. When Darius reclaimed the throne, the Magi conveniently aligned themselves with the new regime. The story had the dual benefit of legitimizing Darius's rule while demonizing any dissenters as enemies of divine order. Talk about a narrative double whammy. But here's where it gets juicy. The Magi weren't just spiritual guides, they were also the keepers of sacred knowledge, holding sway over education and scientific inquiry. In a world where literacy was a luxury, the ability to read and interpret sacred texts was akin to having the keys to the kingdom. The Magi used this to their advantage, maintaining control over the flow of information and, by extension, the perception of reality itself. Their influence was so profound that even the Greeks, those famously skeptical philosophers, couldn't help but be impressed. The Magi's reputation spread far and wide, becoming synonymous with wisdom and mystery. In fact, the word magic itself is derived from magi, a testament to their enduring impact on the cultural lexicon. But let's not forget the economic angle here. The Magi's services weren't free. Far from it. Their allegiance could be as costly as a modern-day political campaign, requiring a steady stream of offerings and tributes to keep the divine favour flowing. So, while the notion of the Magi as mystical seers is undeniably romantic, the reality is that they were shrewd strategists who understood the power of perception. They wielded their influence not just through supernatural claims, but by embedding themselves in the very fabric of Persian society, ensuring that their role was indispensable to the empire's functioning. But what of the Persian rulers themselves? Did they truly believe in the Magi's magical prowess, or were they merely using them as a tool of control? The answer likely lies somewhere in between. For a ruler like Darius or Xerxes, belief in the divine was both a personal conviction and a political necessity. It was a way to unify the diverse peoples of the empire under a common spiritual umbrella, while also reinforcing the ruler's own authority as divinely sanctioned. This wasn't just about keeping the populace in line, it was also about maintaining stability within the ruling class. The Magi served as intermediaries, mediating between the earthly and the divine, ensuring that the royal court's actions aligned with what they claimed was the will of the gods. It was a delicate balancing act, and one that required a keen understanding of both theology and realpolitik. But let's not sugarcoat it. The relationship between the Persian kings and the Magi wasn't always harmonious. There were times when the Magi's influence threatened to overshadow the king's own authority, leading to tension and conflict. The Magi had their own interests to protect, after all, and weren't above using their position to advance their agenda. This dynamic was a double-edged sword, providing both stability and potential discord within the empire's power structure. As we peel back the layers of myth and reality, it's clear that the Magi were more than just mystical figures. They were integral to the political machinery of the Persian Empire, using their knowledge and influence to shape the course of history. Whether through genuine belief or calculated strategy, They played a pivotal role in maintaining the delicate equilibrium between power and faith. And so, as we prepare to delve deeper into this complex web of magic and politics, let's keep in mind that the story of the Magi is far from over. Their legacy, like that of the Persian Empire itself, is a testament to the enduring interplay between myth and reality, reminding us that sometimes the most potent magic is the one that shapes how we see the world. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of ancient Persia, where the lines between legend and history are as fluid as the sands of time. As we continue unraveling the intertwined destinies of magic and politics in ancient Persia, let's shift our gaze from the lofty palaces and sacred fire temples to the bustling streets and humble homes where everyday Persians lived their lives. Alchemy and magic weren't just the playthings of kings and priests, they were woven into the very fabric of daily existence. If the Persian Empire was a tapestry, magic was the golden thread that added both sparkle and complexity. Picture a bustling Persian bazaar, where the scent of spices mingles with the chatter of merchants hawking their wares. Amidst the noise, you might spot a vendor selling small amulets, each one promising protection from evil spirits or the evil eye. These amulets weren't just for show, they were believed to hold genuine power. In a world where a plague could sweep through a village faster than a modern-day Wi-Fi connection, any edge against misfortune was worth a few coins. Now, let's talk rituals. Imagine a farmer, worried about his upcoming harvest, performing a ritual to ensure fertility and abundance. This was more than just a prayer. It was a carefully orchestrated ceremony involving the burial of sacred objects, special incantations, and perhaps even a sacrifice or two. The goal? To appease the spirits of the land and secure their favour. These rituals were as much about psychological comfort as they were about spiritual belief. In a time when the weather forecast was as unpredictable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, who wouldn't want a little extra assurance? But hold your horses before you romanticize this too much. While the idea of magic-infused daily life sounds charming, let's not forget the darker side of this belief system. Superstition could easily spiral into paranoia. If your neighbour suddenly fell ill or your livestock mysteriously perished, it wasn't a far leap to suspect a curse. Witch hunts and accusations, though not as infamous as those in later European history, were not unheard of. The line between protecting oneself and casting blame was as thin as a reed in the Persian marshes. In terms of societal structure, magic served as a great equalizer. It offered a sense of control in a world where the average lifespan was about 30 to 35 years, and a bad harvest could mean starvation. Whether you were a noble with gilded sandals or a peasant with calloused hands, everyone was subject to the whims of fate. Magic then was a tool for levelling the playing field, a shared language that transcended class and wealth. The economic implications of these practices were significant. A thriving market for magical services and goods developed, akin to today's wellness industry. From amulets to potions to fortune-telling sessions, magic was big business. Merchants and craftsmen specialized in creating and selling these items, contributing to the economy and creating a unique sector that was as much about hope as it was about commerce. Yet, the appeal of magic wasn't purely transactional. It was deeply intertwined with religion, particularly Zoroastrianism, which was the dominant faith in the empire. The Magi, those Zoroastrian priests we love to talk about, were the gatekeepers of this spiritual, mystical complex. They performed rituals, interpreted divine will, and ensured that the cosmic order was maintained. Through their rituals, the Magi reinforced social norms and hierarchies, keeping the empire's spiritual and political machinery well-oiled. Now let's debunk a few myths. While the image of the Magi as all-powerful sorcerers is captivating, the reality was more grounded. Their magic often involved a mix of herbal remedies, psychological insight, and social engineering. Sure, they might have thrown in a few flashy words and gestures for effect, but the real magic lay in their ability to read human nature and societal trends. They were less Gandalf and more Machiavelli, with a splash of Yoda. And what of alchemy, that seductive science of transformation? For the everyday Persian, alchemy was less about gold and immortality and more about practical applications. Alchemists dabbled in metallurgy, medicine, and even cosmetics. Their experiments, while often tinged with mystical overtones, laid the groundwork for practical advancements. The pursuit of the philosopher's stone may have been a pipe dream, but the alchemist's lab was a precursor to the modern pharmacy, offering remedies and treatments that could genuinely improve life, or at least make it a little more bearable. In this context, alchemy wasn't merely a fringe pursuit, it was a respected discipline, one that attracted both the curious and the desperate. Families would pay alchemists to concoct potions to cure ailments, enhance fertility, or even improve their love lives. Sound familiar? Today, we might call these services holistic medicine or alternative therapies, but the principle remains the same, a blend of hope, science, and just a dash of mystery. Of course, not all alchemists were created equal. Some were genuine seekers of knowledge, while others were little more than charlatans with a knack for showmanship. The challenge for the average Persian was discerning between the two, a task as tricky as telling a mirage from an oasis. The allure of alchemy, with its promises of transformation and transcendence, was powerful enough to keep people coming back, even when results were as elusive as that mythical gold. As we weave through these historical threads, it's clear that magic and alchemy in ancient Persia were more than just quaint traditions. They were essential components of a complex societal ecosystem, offering hope, stability, and sometimes even genuine solutions in a world fraught with uncertainty. They were the tools by which people navigated the unknown, seeking to bend the capriciousness of life to their will. Yet for all its enchantment, magic had its limits. There were problems it couldn't solve, questions it couldn't answer. And as the Persian Empire evolved, so too did its relationship with these mystical practices. The seeds planted by those ancient alchemists and magicians would eventually blossom into the scientific and philosophical traditions that reshaped the world. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's linger a little longer in the shadowy corners of ancient Persia, where the next twist in our story awaits. As we explore further, we'll continue to peel back the layers of myth and reality, uncovering the truths that lie beneath the surface. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the most compelling magic is the kind that reveals the world as it truly is. Complex, messy, and endlessly fascinating. Stay tuned, because the next part of our journey promises even more revelations, and perhaps a few surprises along the way. As we delve deeper into the enchanting world of Persian alchemy and magic, let's not forget that these practices didn't just fizzle out like a forgotten spell. Oh no, their legacy is like glitter. It gets everywhere and refuses to be ignored. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find their influence woven into the very fabric of other cultures, from the Greeks to the Arabs, and eventually to the Renaissance thinkers who would lay the groundwork for modern science. It turns out, the mystical musings of ancient Persia were the intellectual equivalent of a viral meme, passed along and reinterpreted through the ages. Let's start with the Greeks. By the time Alexander the Great was busy conquering everything in sight, he stumbled upon Persian wisdom and thought, hey, this magic stuff might be onto something. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato, fascinated by the mystical aspects of Persian thought, began integrating these ideas into their own philosophical frameworks. But it was the Hellenistic period that truly saw a cultural exchange of ideas, with the blending of Greek and Persian knowledge creating a rich tapestry of intellectual pursuit. Think of it as the ancient version of a TED Talk crossover episode, with a little less tech and a lot more incense. Then came the Arabs, who really took the baton and ran with it. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars weren't just content with preserving Greek and Persian texts, they expanded upon them, into the likes of Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Razi, whose works on medicine and chemistry were heavily influenced by the alchemical traditions they inherited. These scholars weren't just dabbling in the mystical, they were laying the foundations for the scientific method. Al-Razi, for instance, was more interested in testing hypotheses than in conjuring gold out of thin air. He was the kind of guy who'd rather have a lab explosion on his hands than a mystical poem. And honestly, who can blame him? This intellectual lineage continued to evolve, reaching a crescendo during the European Renaissance. Figures like Paracelsus and Isaac Newton. Yes, that Newton, who got bonked on the head by an apple, were deeply influenced by the alchemical traditions passed down through centuries. Paracelsus, the father of toxicology, wasn't just mixing potions for kicks, he was pioneering a scientific approach to medicine. Meanwhile, Newton, the quintessential man of science, spent as much time on alchemical experiments as he did on physics. It seems that even the guy who figured out gravity couldn't resist the allure of turning lead into gold. But let's slow down and take a moment to appreciate the irony. The very practices that were once dismissed as mystical mumbo-jumbo eventually paved the way for the rational, scientific approaches we value today. Alchemists, with their obsession over the transformation of matter, inadvertently laid the groundwork for modern chemistry. Their meticulous record-keeping and experimental methods turned out to be the real gold, setting the stage for scientific inquiry that would change the world forever. Now, let's not sugarcoat the past with too much romance. While the allure of magic and alchemy is undeniable, the reality was often less glamorous. These pursuits were expensive, risky, and, more often than not, yielded little in the way of tangible results. For every breakthrough, there were countless failures, and for every genuine seeker of knowledge, there were charlatans looking to make a quick buck. Yet, therein lies the human condition, our relentless pursuit of the unknown, despite the odds and setbacks. And speaking of the human condition, let's talk about myths. The ancient Persians, with their rich tapestry of stories and legends, left us a legacy of myths that continue to captivate the imagination. From tales of the Magi to the elusive philosopher's stone, these stories have endured precisely because they tap into something universal. The desire for transformation, for transcendence, for a touch of the divine in our mundane lives. Even today, the notion of hidden knowledge and secret wisdom continues to resonate, from conspiracy theories to self-help gurus peddling the latest path to enlightenment. But why do these myths persist? Perhaps it's because they offer a kind of escape, a way to make sense of a world that's often chaotic and unpredictable. In a sense, myths serve the same function today as they did in ancient Persia. They provide a framework for understanding our place in the cosmos, a narrative that connects us to something larger than ourselves. And while we might not be burying charms in our gardens or consulting the stars for our destiny, the impulse to seek meaning and mystery is as strong as ever. So, what can we take away from this journey through the magical halls of ancient Persia? First, that the line between science and magic is not as clear-cut as we might like to think. The very practices that seem fantastical to us now were, in their time, earnest attempts to understand the world. Second, that the quest for knowledge, in all its forms, is a defining feature of the human experience. Whether through empirical science or mystical exploration, the drive to uncover the secrets of the universe is an enduring testament to our insatiable curiosity. And finally, let's consider the enduring appeal of magic and alchemy as a reminder that not everything needs to be explained. In a world increasingly dominated by data and algorithms, there's something profoundly human about embracing the unknown, about allowing for a little mystery and wonder. Because at the end of the day, the real magic lies not in the answers we find, but in the questions we continue to ask. As we wrap up our exploration of ancient Persia, let's leave with a nod to the past and a wink to the present, acknowledging that while the tools and methods may have changed, the quest for knowledge and meaning remains the same. And who knows, maybe there's still a little magic left in the world, waiting to be discovered. After all, history has taught us to expect the unexpected, and that's the kind of enchantment that never fades. You blink awake to the sound of hooves clopping and wheels rattling on cobblestones. Welcome to Williamsburg, Virginia, where the year is 185T and you're about to dive into the gritty, sooty world of colonial blacksmithing. The air is crisp and maybe just a bit smoky, thanks to that forge you're about to fire up. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't your modern-day artisan workshop with Instagrammable metalwork. Nope, this is the grind of colonial life, where your hammer is your best friend and iron your bread and butter. Speaking of iron, did you know it costs about 5 shillings a pound? Yes, 5 shillings. That's like paying for a gourmet latte with a side of financial anxiety. Back then, every pound of that precious metal had to be shipped across the Atlantic, filling the coffers of the British, who were eager to keep their colonies both prosperous and dependent. Iron wasn't just a commodity, it was a statement. If you could afford it, you were doing pretty well. If you couldn't, well, good luck competing with the guy next door who's already churning out horseshoes like he's the Nike of the 18th century. Now, as you stretch and throw on your work clothes, rough spun and probably more than a little itchy, you begin to appreciate the delicate dance of colonial economics. Your shop is essentially a small-scale industry. You're the Amazon Prime of the 1700s, delivering everything from nails to ploughshares. You've got farmers, carpenters, and even the local militia knocking at your door, desperate for your metal magic. Need a new tool? You're the go-to. It's like you're the town's very own metal superhero, except without the cape or the superpowers, just a trusty hammer and a heap of skill. And speaking of hammers, let's talk cost. A decent hammer will set you back around 7 shillings. Not cheap, but then again, your hammer is the Excalibur of the blacksmith world. You wield it to shape the very fabric of colonial life. It's the kind of tool that, when it hits metal, sends sparks flying, not unlike the tiny fireworks of your daily grind. But hold your horses, literally, because horses are a huge part of your business. You're not just a blacksmith, you're a farrier too. That means keeping the town's equine population well shod, so they can pull carts, plough fields and, of course, deliver the mail. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. And it's a good thing too, because Colonial Williamsburg doesn't run on dreams and fairy dust. It runs on hard work and, you guessed it, iron. As you fire up the forge and the heat starts building, think of it as the Colonial version of a morning coffee. Except instead of caffeine, you're jolted awake by the fiery glow of molten metal. The forge is the heart of your operation, the place where raw iron transforms into something valuable. In a way, it's like alchemy, but without the gold and a lot more soot under your nails. You grab a chunk of metal and start working it over the anvil. The rhythmic clang of hammer on iron is both a melody and a message. You're open for business. And business is good. Blacksmiths were indispensable in colonial America, and that's not just because they made cool stuff. They were the linchpins of community development, enabling everything from agriculture to warfare. Imagine Paul Revere without a horse, or a farmer without a plough. That's right out of chaos. Now, let's bust a myth while you're hammering away. The romantic notion of the blacksmith as a solitary brooding artisan? Not entirely accurate. Sure, you might work alone sometimes, but more often than not, you've got an apprentice or two. These young lads are learning the trade, and let's be honest, they're also cheap labour. You teach them the ropes, or the tongs in this case, and they help you keep the shop running. As the day progresses, you're not just churning out tools and horseshoes, you're part of a broader economic tapestry. Trade routes and colonial regulations dictate your access to raw materials, while local demand shapes your output. It's a constant balancing act, and you've got to be as sharp as the blades you forge if you want to stay ahead. By now, the shop is buzzing with activity. Customers drop by to pick up orders, barter for repairs, or just to chat about the latest gossip. You see, blacksmiths were often the social hubs of their communities, a bit like the water cooler of the colonial era. Between the hissing steam and the clamour of the forge, you catch snippets of conversation about everything from politics to crop yields. It's a reminder that you're not just part of the economy, you're part of the community. And let's not forget about the competition. Blacksmithing is a crowded field, and if you want to thrive, you've got to innovate. Maybe you've developed a new technique for tempering steel, or perhaps you're just really good at making that one thing everyone needs. Either way, you've got to stay ahead of the curve, because in colonial America, survival of the fittest isn't just a theory, it's a way of life. So, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, you wipe the sweat from your brow and take a moment to appreciate the fruits of your labor. Every piece of metal you shape is a testament to your skill, your resilience, and your place in this colonial world. It's hard work, but it's honest work. And as the forge crackles and the anvil rings, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're not just a blacksmith, you're a cornerstone of 18th century society. As you stand there, a living testament to the grit of colonial life, let's shift gears from the anvil to the arena of politics and social chess. Because, my friend, in the 18th century, blacksmiths were crucial players, hammering out more than horseshoes. They were forging alliances and fanning the flames of revolution. That's right, your shop wasn't just a place of commerce, it was a hotspot of political intrigue and social manoeuvring. First, let's talk about those pesky British taxes, the ones that had everyone from the coastal elites to the humblest of farmers grumbling into their tankards of ale. Iron, among other goods, was subject to these taxes, making every nail and horseshoe a loaded statement. Your work wasn't just about practicality, it was inherently political. Each strike of your hammer was a subtle act of defiance against the Crown's economic chokehold. The taxes imposed on imported goods like iron and tea were the very sparks that lit the fuse for revolutionary discontent. Remember that little shindig in Boston Harbor? Yeah, The Boston Tea Party didn't just happen overnight. It was the crescendo of a symphony of grievances that included your very trade. Now, let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The notion of the blacksmith as a solitary, brooding artisan. Sure, the romantic image of a lone craftsman toiling away in a dimly lit forge has its appeal, like something out of a colonial noir film. But reality check. Blacksmiths were more like 18th century networkers, weaving a web of connections that would put modern LinkedIn influencers to shame. You, dear blacksmith, were a central node in a social network that stretched from the local tavern to the halls of colonial governance. Your shop was the epicenter of town life, where gossip was exchanged as freely as goods. It's like being the host of a never-ending party with a guest list that includes everyone who's anyone. Your connections extended beyond the local scene too. With the British breathing down everyone's necks, colonies needed to band together, and blacksmiths were pivotal in this unification process. You see, the tools and weapons you crafted were essential for colonial militias gearing up to challenge British rule. Think of yourself as the quiet architect behind the scenes, supplying the essential hardware for the unfolding drama of revolution. Without your ironclad contributions, the Continental Army might have been as effective as a soldier with a musket made of cheese. And speaking of drama, let's not forget the social ladder you're climbing. In colonial society, tradesmen like yourself occupied a respectable niche, a kind of middle ground between the landed gentry and the labouring poor. You wielded influence not just because of your craft, but due to your role as a purveyor of essential goods and news. You might not have had a title or an estate, but man, did you have clout. You're like the medieval Facebook, where people came to connect, trade information, and, occasionally, complain about the latest tax hike. It's not all about politics and society, though. Let's talk economics, because, surprise, surprise, money makes the colonial world go round. The cost of living in Williamsburg wasn't cheap. A good meal could set you back a few shillings, and that's not even counting the cost of keeping your forge running. Remember those apprentices we mentioned earlier? They're not just there for the company. They're an economic necessity, helping you churn out enough product to keep the books balanced. Maybe you're paying them in room and board, or perhaps a few coppers here and there, but they're invaluable to keeping your operation afloat. As the sun climbs higher, you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, taking a moment to appreciate the paradoxes of your trade. You're both a craftsman and a businessman, a community leader and a political player. Each piece of metal you shape is a testament to your skill, but also a symbol of resistance and resilience in the face of colonial challenges. You're not just surviving, you're thriving in a world that demands both innovation and tradition. The forge crackles and the anvil sings, a rhythm that's as much a part of you as the very air you breathe. Every clang is a reminder that you're more than a simple tradesman. You're a cornerstone of society, a vital link in the chain of colonial life. And as the day presses on, you can't help but feel a swell of pride. You're not just forging metal, you're forging a future. Keep that hammer swinging, because your work is far from done, and the story of your trade is only just beginning. As the clang of the anvil fades and the forge settles into a gentle crackle, it's time to hang up your apron, at least for a while, and saunter over to the local tavern. Lunchtime in 18th century Williamsburg isn't just about refueling, it's a cultural ritual, the colonial equivalent of a modern coffee break. And let's be real, you've earned it. After all, shaping the backbone of colonial life is hungry work. The tavern, a lively hub of chatter and clinking tankards, is where you'll find the pulse of the town. This isn't merely about grabbing a bite, it's about diving headlong into the social whirlpool. You're here to catch up on gossip, discuss the latest political rumblings, and maybe even engage in a bit of friendly debate over a pint of ale. And if you're lucky, there might even be a plate of hearty stew waiting for you, which, at around 6p, is a bargain compared to the cost of iron. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or rather, the myth in the forge. The image of the blacksmith as a Herculean figure with biceps forged from iron itself. It's as romantic as it is misleading. Sure, you've got muscles, but they're more from repetitive hammering than any heroic deed. Reality check, blacksmiths were skilled craftsmen, not the action heroes of period dramas. You're more likely to have a bad back from bending over the anvil than to be flexing in a dramatic pose. And speaking of drama, let's bust another myth while we're at it. The idea that blacksmiths were constantly toiling away, covered head to toe in soot like they're auditioning for a role in a Dickensian novel? Not quite. Sure, you work hard, but you also know the value of downtime. In fact, your workday might surprise you with its flexibility. You see, blacksmithing isn't about constant chaos. It's about cycles of intense activity and strategic pauses. Much like a modern freelancer's gig economy, when you're not hammering away, you're planning your next move, sourcing materials, or perhaps sketching out designs for custom orders. It's a rhythm that's less about relentless hustle and more about mastering the art of timing. The Colonial blacksmith schedule was a mix of bursts of labour and thoughtful intermissions, a dance of productivity that would make any contemporary self-help guru nod in approval. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The reality is, even with these breaks, the work is tough. Your hands bear the calluses of your trade, your muscles the memory of countless hours spent shaping metal. It's a stark reminder that while the life of the blacksmith might have its perks, it's not without its price. You're constantly balancing the demands of your craft with the realities of colonial life, where every shilling counts and every customer interaction could mean the difference between a full table and an empty one. As you sip your ale, the conversation around you ebbs and flows. Talk of crops, taxes, and the latest colonial news fills the air, punctuated by the occasional hearty laugh or the clink of a tankard. It's a vibrant tapestry of voices, each contributing to the larger narrative of colonial Williamsburg, and you, dear blacksmith, are at the centre of it all, a pivotal player in this unfolding story. In the tavern's warm embrace, it's easy to forget the woes of the world outside. But then someone mentions the latest edict from the Crown, and the room's mood shifts ever so slightly. The spectre of British rule looms large, even here within these cosy walls. It's a reminder that while you might be taking a break, the world keeps turning, and the challenges of your trade and your time remain ever present. You see, blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen, they were savvy businessmen, keenly aware of the political and economic forces at play. Every nail you forge, every tool you craft is affected by the whims of far-off rulers and the local demand. It's a constant juggling act, one that requires both skill and shrewdness. And while the notion of a blacksmith as a simple tradesman is appealing, it's only half the story. You're also a strategist, navigating the complexities of colonial commerce with the precision of a master craftsman. As you drain the last of your ale and prepare to return to the forge, you can't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with your fellow patrons. Here, in the heart of Williamsburg, you're not just part of a community, you're part of a larger tapestry, one woven from the threads of history, politics, and everyday life. It's a role that's both humbling and empowering, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, you're helping to shape the future, one iron bar at a time. So, as the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the cobblestone streets, you head back to your shop, ready to take up the hammer once more. The forge awaits, and with it, the promise of another day's work. It might not be glamorous, but it's yours, and that's worth more than all the gilded myths in the world. Keep the fires burning, because the story of the blacksmith is far from finished, and there's still much to forge in the days ahead. As you stroll back to your forge, the cobblestones echo under your boots, reminding you that the business of blacksmithing is as much about the journey as the destination. Time to reignite that fire, both literally and figuratively, because the afternoon is when the real magic, or should I say, metallurgy, happens. The technology of the 18th century blacksmith might seem rudimentary by today's standards, but don't be fooled. This was cutting-edge stuff back then. Let's start with the bellows, the unsung hero of the forge. It's essentially a giant leather lung that breathes life into your fire, transforming it from a gentle crackle to a roaring inferno capable of melting iron at temperatures upwards of 2800 degrees F. Yes, you heard that right. This isn't just some medieval hairdryer. It's the lifeline of your entire operation. Without that steady whoosh of air, you'd be stuck with a lukewarm mess instead of a blaze hot enough to shape destiny, or at least a decent horseshoe. And then there's the anvil, the blacksmith's altar. Weighing in at about 100 pounds or more, this chunk of iron isn't just a solid surface, it's a multi-tool masquerading as a block. Its flat face, horn, and hardy hole, yes, that's really what it's called. Get your Snickers out now, serve different purposes, from flattening to bending to punching holes. It's like having a Swiss Army knife that you're not going to lose in the sofa cushions. Running a blacksmith shop was Colonial project management at its finest. You may not have a Gantt chart or Slack channel, but the logistics still demand top-notch organization. First, there's the matter of supply. Iron isn't going to magically appear at your doorstep like some 18th century Amazon Prime delivery. It arrives by ship, imported from Britain, and it costs a pretty penny. We're talking about 5 shillings a pound, remember? That makes inventory management not just a task, but an art form. You have to anticipate demand, stockpile wisely, and, most importantly, avoid waste like the plague. As for keeping a steady workflow, it's all about timing. You can't just hammer away willy-nilly. Each piece of work requires its own rhythm, a delicate dance of heating, hammering, and cooling. It's a cycle that demands both patience and precision. And while we're talking about precision, let's acknowledge the occasional mishap because, oh boy, do they happen. Picture this. You swing your hammer with gusto, only to miss the mark and smack your thumb instead. Painful? Sure. Embarrassing? Absolutely. The Colonial equivalent of hitting reply all when you meant reply? Without a doubt. But hey, mistakes are part of the learning curve, right? And speaking of curves, let's talk about the skill set you need to keep this whole operation afloat. It's not just about brute strength, although that certainly helps. You need an eye for detail, a steady hand, and a knack for geometry. Who knew that all those math problems about angles and force would actually come in handy one day? Every piece of metal you work with demands its own specific approach, be it a delicate scroll on a wrought iron gate or the perfect curve of a scythe blade. In the midst of all this, you've got to be a bit of a people person as well. Customers don't just want quality goods, they want to know they can trust the person making them. This means building relationships, managing expectations, and occasionally smoothing over ruffled feathers when things don't go as planned. After all, a happy customer is a repeat customer, and in a small colonial town, word of mouth is as good as gold. Now, let's bust another myth. The idea that blacksmiths were isolated, grunting away in their workshops like hermits at a metal monastery. The truth is far from it. Your shop is a bustling hub of activity, a crossroads where people from all walks of life converge. Farmers, soldiers, merchants. They all pass through your doors, each with their own stories, needs, and, sometimes, unsolicited advice on how to do your job. It's a bit like being the bartender of the 18th century, except your drinks are spades and shovels. As you work, the clang of metal on metal becomes a steady symphony, accompanied by the hiss of steam and the occasional grunt of effort. Each piece you create is a testament to your skill and adaptability. And while the romantic notion of the lone brooding blacksmith might persist, the reality is that you're part of a team. Your apprentices are there, learning the ropes and helping you keep things moving. They might not have the experience yet, but they make up for it with enthusiasm and a willingness to learn most of the time anyway. It's not all smooth sailing, no. The colonial economy is a fickle beast, and demand can fluctuate faster than you can say King George's taxes. This means you've got to be nimble, ready to pivot from making ploughshares to crafting cooking pots at a moment's notice. It's a constant balancing act, one that requires both intuition and experience to master. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of competition. Blacksmithing is a crowded field, and if you want to keep your place at the top, you've got to innovate. Maybe you experiment with new alloys or develop a unique style that sets your work apart. Whatever the case, standing still is not an option. You've got to keep pushing forward, adapting to the changing times while staying true to the traditions that got you here in the first place. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the workshop, you can't help but reflect on the day's work. There's a satisfaction in seeing the tangible results of your labor, in knowing that you've contributed to the community in a meaningful way. Each item you've crafted is a piece of history, a small but essential part of the colonial tapestry. And so, as the forge's glow dims and the anvil's song quiets, you prepare to hang up your apron for the day, but not before taking a moment to appreciate the journey you're on. It's a path filled with challenges and triumphs, one that requires both grit and grace to navigate. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping your future, one hammer blow at a time. As you close up shop, the world outside is ever-changing, and tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities. But for now, the forge stands silent, a testament to the day's toil and triumph. You've earned a moment of respite, a chance to rest and recharge before the cycle begins anew. Because in the world of the colonial blacksmith, The work is never truly done. It's a story that continues to unfold with each new sunrise. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over Williamsburg's cobblestone streets, you close the heavy wooden door to your forge. It's a moment of transition, from the heat and intensity of the day's labour to the cooler, quieter embrace of evening. But before you head home, let's take a step back and see how the blacksmith's day fits into the grand tapestry of colonial life and beyond. You've been hammering away at more than just metal. You've been shaping the very foundation of a burgeoning economy. In the 18th century, blacksmiths weren't just necessary, they were indispensable. Your work was critical to nearly every aspect of colonial life, from agriculture to defence. And let's not forget transportation. After all, those wagons and carriages didn't move by sheer willpower. They needed wheels and axles, and you were the one making sure those were in top shape. Your shop was essentially the pit stop for the Colonial mass car circuit, sans the raucous crowds and sponsorship deals. Let's talk economics, because, let's face it, money talks louder than Paul Revere ever did. Your shop's output fed into the local economy like a vital artery. Every nail you sold, every horseshoe you fitted, contributed to a complex web of trade and commerce. The raw iron you imported, costing you those precious 5 shillings per pound, was transformed into goods that kept the colonial machine churning. And while you might not have seen yourself as a titan of industry, your role was akin to being an unheralded linchpin, making sure the colonial cogwheels kept turning. Now, here's the kicker. Your contribution went beyond just keeping the economy afloat. You were part of a revolution, literally. The tools and weapons forged in your shop were the very ones that would arm colonial militias in their fight against British rule. While the history books might glorify the leaders and strategists, it was your handiwork that gave them the means to challenge the most powerful empire in the world. You were the unsung hero of the revolutionary narrative, the artisan behind the arsenal. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The reality was often much grittier. Blacksmiths didn't work in isolation. You were part of a community, a network of artisans and traders all grappling with the same challenges: fluctuating supply chains, shifting political landscapes, and the relentless grind of day-to-day survival. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine a simpler time where everyone pulled together for the common good. But the truth? There were turf wars, rivalries, and more than a few backroom deals. It was as cutthroat as any modern business environment, just with a bit more soot and fewer PowerPoint presentations. Now, let's debunk a myth that still clings to the ironwork like rust. The idea that blacksmiths were solitary figures toiling away in obscurity couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, you were a key player in a bustling colonial ecosystem. Your shop was a social hub, a place where news was exchanged, deals were struck, and bonds were forged as strong as any iron chain. You were at the heart of the community, with a reach that extended far beyond your anvil and tongs. In many ways, your work laid the groundwork, literally and metaphorically, for what America would become. The infrastructure you helped build, the tools you crafted, the innovations you pioneered, all contributed to a nation on the brink of revolution and change. And while your name might not be etched in history alongside the likes of Washington or Jefferson, your impact was no less significant. You were the quiet force that powered the revolution, the steady hand that helped forge a new world. As evening falls, the forge cools, and the day's labour gives way to reflection. Consider this. Your legacy isn't just in the iron and steel you shaped, but in the spirit of resilience and innovation you embodied. You were more than just a tradesman. You were a pioneer, a problem solver, and a cornerstone of your community. And in a world where change was the only constant, your ability to adapt and evolve was perhaps your greatest contribution of all. So, as you walk home under the starlit sky, take pride in the knowledge that your work was pivotal in building a nation. You weren't just hammering out tools, you were crafting the future. And that's a legacy worth its weight in gold, or, in your case, iron. Here's to the blacksmiths, the unsung heroes who literally forged the path to independence and beyond. Rest easy tonight, for tomorrow the forge will beckon once more, and with it the promise of another day's work that continues to shape the ever-unfolding story of America. As dawn broke over the Aegean Sea, the island of Lesbos began another day of commerce, culture, and perhaps a few hushed scandals whispered among its inhabitants. Enter Sappho, the island's most enigmatic resident, who would eventually become known as the 10th Muse. But before we get swept away by her lyrical genius, let's set the stage. We're talking about a woman born around 630 BCE, when the idea of women wielding pens or styluses in this case was about as common as a politician with a straight answer. Lesbos wasn't just any Greek island, mind you. It was a buzzing hub of trade and artistic activity. With its fertile lands and strategic position near Asia Minor, it was the kind of place where you could trade olive oil for a new toga without breaking a sweat. The island's economy thrived on agriculture and trade, and with that came a smorgasbord of cultural influences. Sappho grew up in a society that was a melting pot of ideas, where the wine flowed as freely as the gossip. Speaking of gossip, ancient historians were the TMZ of their day, and Sappho was no stranger to their papyrus headlines. The scraps of information we have about her life are a mix of fact, fiction, and a bit of poetic embellishment. The ancient Greeks were notorious for their love of a good story, even if it meant stretching the truth like a piece of taffy. According to some sources, Sappho had 3 brothers and may have been married to a wealthy man named Cercylas. But let's take that with a pinch of salt, as these accounts are about as reliable as a fortune teller on a caffeine high. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or the peplos in the symposium. Sappho's reputation has been coloured by centuries of speculation about her personal life. The term lesbian itself comes from Lesbos, thanks to Sappho's intimate poetry about women. This has led to countless debates about her sexuality, but let's not forget that in her time, the line between platonic and romantic love was as blurry as a fresco after a night of hard partying. In reality, Sappho's work celebrated female relationships in a way that was both revolutionary and deeply personal. Her poetry was less about labels and more about the raw, unfiltered emotion that transcends time and gender. While we're myth-busting, let's clarify that Sappho wasn't exiled for her scandalous life, contrary to some juicy ancient rumours. There's a popular tale of her being banished to Sicily, but that's more myth than reality. The political climate of Lesbos was a bit turbulent, to say the least, with power struggles and shifting alliances. It's more likely that any temporary relocation was due to the island's political upheaval rather than a punishment for her verse. Lesbos itself was no stranger to drama. It had its fair share of tyrants and political machinations. During Sappho's lifetime, the island was under the control of the Mytilenean League, a powerful political entity that kept the local aristocracy on their toes. The economic backdrop was equally fascinating. With trade routes crisscrossing the Aegean, Lesbos was a vital player in the ancient economy. The olive oil and wine produced on the island were highly prized, and the local aristocracy, Sappho's crowd, was deeply involved in these enterprises. Let's not forget the social dynamics at play. In a world where men typically dominated the public sphere, Sappho's emergence as a poet was nothing short of extraordinary. Women in ancient Greece were generally expected to be seen and not heard, which makes Sappho's prominence all the more remarkable. She ran a Thiassos, an informal gathering of women dedicated to the arts and the worship of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. It was here that Sappho honed her craft, writing poetry that would resonate for millennia. Her poetry, much like her life, is shrouded in mystery. Only fragments survive, a tantalizing glimpse into a world long gone. Yet these fragments are powerful enough to have earned her a permanent place in the pantheon of great poets. She wrote in Aeolic Greek, a dialect that added a unique flavour to her verse. Her themes were universal, love, longing, and the passage of time. But her perspective was distinctly female, offering a rare insight into the emotions and experiences of women in ancient Greece. So, as the sun set over Lesbos, casting golden hues across the island's olive groves, one could imagine Sappho sitting with her fellow women, sharing stories and laughter, her words weaving a tapestry of emotion that would echo through the ages. Her life, like her poetry, was a blend of the real and the imagined, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. As we peel back the layers of myth and legend, we find a woman who was not just a poet but a pioneer, challenging the norms of her day with every stroke of her stylus. As Sappho's stylus etched emotions onto papyrus, she crafted verses that would echo through the ages, despite the many challenges that stood in their way. Let's dive into the world of Sappho's poetry, where love and longing were frequent guests, but not without a side of economic and historical spice. Sappho's surviving works are like a minimalist Spotify playlist. Barely 650 lines remain, collected in less than 200 fragments, and only one complete poem survives in its entirety. To put that in perspective, Taylor Swift could fit more lyrics into a single album. However, what we do have is enough to showcase Sappho's genius. Her poetry wasn't just about the typical themes of love and desire, but a rich tapestry of human emotion, often expressed with a raw, unguarded honesty that feels as fresh today as it must have millennia ago. Her most famous piece, Ode to Aphrodite, is a hymn to the goddess of love herself, pleading for relief from unrequited love. It's like an ancient Greek version of a late-night text to your crush, begging for a sign of affection. Sappho's use of the Aeolic dialect gives her poetry a unique rhythm and musicality, a bit like finding a rare vinyl record with a sound you can't quite describe but can't stop playing. But how did these works survive the ravages of time, you ask? Well, unlike today's digital files, which can be wiped out with a single click, Sappho's words endured thanks to a mix of luck, admiration, and perhaps a touch of divine intervention. The survival of her fragments is largely due to the admiration of later poets and scholars who copied her works, or what was left of them, onto papyrus, a commodity that wasn't exactly cheap at the time. Imagine trying to write a novel on a material that costs as much as a small car. Papyrus, imported from Egypt, was the ancient world's high-end stationery, and ink wasn't much cheaper, often made from a concoction of soot, gum, and water. The cost of these materials was significant enough to make every word count. So, you can thank some diligent scribes for preserving Sappho's magic, though they probably grumbled about the cost of their supplies while doing so. Now, let's address the School for Girls legend, a delightful tale that paints Sappho as the headmistress of an ancient finishing school. It's a charming image, isn't it? Young women gathered to learn the arts, guided by the poetic wisdom of Sappho herself. But, alas, this story is more fiction than fact. The reality was probably less structured, a thiasos, or a gathering of women, where they celebrated the arts and the worship of Aphrodite. Think of it as a cultural salon, rather than a Hogwarts for ancient Greek girls. While this setup may not have been as formal as a school, it was revolutionary in its own right, providing women with a rare space to express themselves creatively. Sappho's rumoured love life? Now there's a topic that has fueled centuries of speculation and gossip. Was she the original heartbreaker of Lesbos, or simply a passionate poet whose words were misconstrued? The truth is, we don't have a definitive answer. Her poetry speaks of love and desire towards women, leading to endless debates about her sexuality. Yet, in ancient Greece, the boundaries between platonic and romantic love were as fluid as a well-poured glass of wine. It's important to remember that her words reflect the cultural norms of her time, where expressions of affection between women were not unusual or scandalous. This brings us to a broader understanding of her work. Sappho's poetry was more than just an exploration of love. It was a reflection of her world, one that allowed glimpses into the lives of women otherwise hidden in history's shadows. Her words gave voice to feelings that were universal, transcending the societal boundaries of her era. Whether she was writing about the joys of friendship or the pangs of unrequited love, her ability to capture the essence of human experience remains unparalleled. So why, you might wonder, did Sappho's work face such a rocky road to survival? The answer lies in the ever-changing tides of cultural and religious attitudes. By the Middle Ages, her works were viewed with suspicion, even destruction, by those who considered them too pagan or too risque for the times. It's a testament to her enduring power that even a few scraps of her poetry could survive such scrutiny and still speak to us today. In the grand tapestry of history, Sappho's contribution is like an intricate thread that, though frayed, remains vibrant. Her poetry not only offers insight into her own life and times, but also challenges us to reconsider the narratives we've been told about love, gender, and creativity. As we prepare to delve deeper into her legacy, let's keep in mind the delicate dance between legend and reality, where Sappho's words continue to inspire and provoke thought. And there you have it, a peek into the world of Sappho, where poetry wasn't just an art form, but a revolutionary act. As we continue our journey, remember that each fragment of her work is a testament to her indomitable spirit, whispering across the ages with a voice that refuses to be silenced. Stay tuned, because the story of Sappho is far from over, and there's much more to uncover about this enigmatic woman whose words still ring true today. So, as we round the corner from the ancient world into the tumultuous waters of the posthumous saga of Sappho, buckle up. It's a wild ride through time that sees our poet's reputation tossed around more than a ship in a Greek storm. The Romans, those empire-building aficionados, were the first to pick up what Sappho was putting down. They couldn't get enough of her poetry, and her works were read alongside those of their own greats like Catullus and Horace. In fact, Catullus was so smitten with Sappho's style that he borrowed liberally from her verses. He was basically the ancient world's version of a cover band, but instead of guitars, we're talking papyrus and styluses. Her Ode to Aphrodite became something of a template for Roman poets seeking to capture the complexities of love and longing. But Rome's admiration didn't just inflate Sappho's literary clout, it also had economic implications. The demand for her work meant that manuscript copying became big business. We're talking about a pre-Gutenberg era, where every book was painstakingly copied by hand. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a modern print-on-demand service. Except each unit was crafted by a scribe who had to be as precise as a surgeon. The cost of a manuscript was no small change, often equivalent to a month's salary for a skilled labourer, and Sappho's popularity ensured that scribes had steady work. Her works were copied and recopied, a testament to their value both culturally and economically. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and suddenly the party's over. Sappho's works were caught in the crosshairs of a society that preferred its literature with a side of piety and less of the pagan romance. Enter censorship, stage left. The medieval church, not exactly known for its love of free-spirited expressions, viewed her poetry as a bit too risque, a bit too, shall we say, too much free love for their taste. The result? Her works were either lost to the sands of time or outright destroyed, a literary purge that makes one wonder just how many masterpieces slipped through history's fingers due to a bad case of moral indigestion. Yet, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Sappho's reputation was resurrected during the Renaissance, a time when Europe collectively decided it might be fun to look back at the ancients and see what they had to offer. Scholars, poets, and artists were suddenly as obsessed with Sappho as a teen with a new TikTok trend. Her works were rediscovered, reinterpreted, and once again her words flowed through the pens of Europe's intellectual elite. This was the era of humanism, a love letter to the human experience, and who better to embody that than Sappho? The economic implications of her Renaissance revival were significant. Manuscript copying was still a lucrative trade, and with the advent of the printing press in the mid-15th century, Sappho's works could reach even wider audiences. The cost of books plummeted, suddenly making her poetry accessible to a burgeoning middle class. It's like going from bespoke tailoring to ready-to-wear fashion. More people could finally get in on the action. And then we stumble into the Victorian era, a time when Sappho's legacy took yet another bizarre twist. Victorian scholars, with their starched collars and even stiffer sensibilities, found themselves in a bit of a pickle. They revered Sappho's genius, but were decidedly less comfortable with her subject matter. Their solution? Sanitize her legacy. They went to work with the zeal of a parent, frantically child-proofing a room. Except they weren't protecting anyone from harm, just from the scandalous nature of genuine human emotion. They cherry-picked her works, downplayed the more sensual elements, and focused on her lyrical prowess. The result was a Sappho who was more palatable to Victorian tastes. Artistic, yes, but with a hefty dose of good old-fashioned repression. And so, Sappho became a cultural icon, not just for her poetry, but for what she represented, a challenge to the status quo, a voice that refused to be silenced no matter how many times history tried to write her out of the story. Her journey through the ages is a reminder of the timeless nature of art and the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity. As we continue to explore her legacy, remember that Sappho's story is far from over, and her voice, though often whispered through the fragments of time, continues to inspire those who dare to listen. As we wade into the rollicking tides of the 19th and 20th centuries, Sappho's legacy gets a makeover that would make a reality TV star blush. You see, the Victorian sanitization of her image was just the appetizer. The main course? A feast of feminist and LGBTQ+ movements, chomping at the bit to reclaim her as a symbol of empowerment and identity. So, Let's dive in and untangle how Sappho became the poster child for female and queer expression, all the while being commodified and politicized like a pop culture icon with a penchant for poetry. In the 19th century, the winds of change were blowing fiercely, and they carried with them the whispers of Sappho's poetry. Enter the women's suffrage movement, which found in Sappho a kindred spirit. Her life and work were re-evaluated, not as mere footnotes in the annals of Greek poetry, but as powerful expressions of female agency. Sappho's Thiassos, once a quaint cultural gathering, was now seen as an early feminist collective, a space where women could freely explore art and identity. Her love poems to women were no longer scandalous whispers, but rallying cries for women's autonomy. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the LGBTQ+ community embraced Sappho with open arms. Her name became synonymous with female same-sex love. The term sapphic was coined, and suddenly Sappho was the Greek goddess of queerness. Her poetry, those tantalizing fragments, was interpreted as the voice of a woman unafraid to express her love and desire for other women. This wasn't just about poetry anymore, it was about identity, visibility, and pride. Sappho became a symbol, a beacon for those who found themselves outside the rigid confines of heteronormative society. But here's where it gets juicy. Sappho's image was not only embraced, but also commercialized. The late 20th century saw her likeness plastered across everything from book covers to coffee mugs. She was a highbrow reference, the kind of name you could drop in a literary discussion to instantly raise your intellectual street cred. At the same time, she became a shorthand for female empowerment, her face adorning feminist zines and LGBTQ+ paraphernalia. The irony? Sappho, who lived in a time when a papyrus scroll was a luxury, was now part of a consumerist landscape that made her a commodity. Let's not forget the political dimension here. Sappho's image was wielded like a double-edged sword. On one hand, she was celebrated for challenging patriarchal norms and expressing queer identity. On the other, she was a convenient icon for those looking to sanitize her image to fit their agendas. Her poetry, once raw and unfiltered, was often cherry-picked to highlight themes that aligned with modern movements. It was like watching a classic film get remade with all the gritty bits cut out and replaced with CGI explosions. Captivating, yes, but not quite the real deal. Now, let's talk numbers. By the late 20th century, Sappho's works had been translated into dozens of languages, with her poetry collections selling thousands of copies worldwide. Academic conferences dedicated to her work popped up like daisies in spring, each one dissecting her life and legacy with microscopic precision. The economic impact was significant, not just in book sales, but in the broader cultural cachet that her name carried. She became a brand, a symbol that transcended the dusty pages of history to become relevant in contemporary discourse. And what of Sappho in pop culture? There's a twist worthy of a Netflix series. Her influence seeped into music, literature, and even film. Modern musicians have cited her as an inspiration, and her poetry has been woven into song lyrics, adding a touch of ancient allure to contemporary tunes. In literature, she's been the muse behind countless novels and poems, her elusive presence a source of endless fascination. Even in film, Sappho's spirit lingers, her life and loves inspiring stories that challenge traditional narratives and celebrate diversity. So where does that leave us? Sappho's journey through the 19th and 20th centuries is a testament to the enduring power of art to inspire and provoke. Her poetry, once nearly lost to history, has become a rallying cry for those seeking to redefine identity and challenge societal norms. But it's also a cautionary tale of how easily art can be co-opted and commercialized, its raw edges smoothed over to fit the mold of marketability. As we stand on the threshold of the next chapter in Sappho's posthumous life, remember that her story is far from over. The past century has seen her reborn as an icon of empowerment and a symbol of love that knows no boundaries. Yet, her true legacy lies in the fragments she left behind, words that continue to resonate, challenging us to look beyond the myths and embrace the reality of a woman whose voice refused to be silenced. Stick around, because the tale of Sappho is still unfolding, and there's plenty more to explore as we dig deeper into the life and legacy of this remarkable poet whose words continue to illuminate the human experience. As we peer into Sappho's legacy, It's clear that her influence is as stubbornly persistent as a cat on a warm laptop. Let's dive into the modern world, where Sappho's spirit flits through the realms of poetry and music like a muse on a caffeine high. Her fingerprints can be found all over contemporary poetry, which has embraced her style of personal, emotive expression. The free verse and confessional poetry movements owe more than a little to Sappho's penchant for bearing her soul in a few well-chosen words. Poets like Anne Carson and Mary Barnard have translated her works, bringing Sappho's voice into the present with a freshness that feels less ancient artifact and more timeless text message. Her lyrical style, characterized by its brevity and intensity, mirrors the modern obsession with sound bites and tweets, a testament to the saying, "Brevity is the soul of wit," even if Shakespeare might have been cribbing notes from Sappho. But it's not just the written word that Sappho's legacy has infiltrated. Music, with its power to evoke emotion and memory, has found a kindred spirit in her work. Artists from Leonard Cohen to Kate Bush have drawn inspiration from Sappho's poetry, weaving her themes of love, longing, and the human condition into their lyrics. Think of her influence as the bass line in a song. You might not always notice it, but it's the backbone of the melody. Even in contemporary pop, where songs often feel as ephemeral as Snapchat stories, the emotional depth that Sappho championed whispers beneath the surface, reminding us that good art never really goes out of style. Her themes, after all, are as universal as they are timeless. Everyone's been struck by the arrow of love at some point, whether through a swipe right or a furtive glance across a crowded room. But let's not get too caught up in the romanticism without a reality check. The myths surrounding Sappho's life, like her supposed leap to her death from the cliffs of Lucas in a fit of unrequited love, are as sticky as a third-grade lunchroom floor. This particular tale, a concoction more suited to a soap opera than historical fact, was likely cooked up by later writers eager for a dramatic climax. The truth is, we don't know how Sappho's story ended, which has only fueled the speculative fires. In a way, these myths persist because they fill the void left by the scant details of her life, offering a narrative where history falls silent. Yet, it's ironic, perhaps even fitting, that a poet celebrated for capturing the essence of human emotion should be shrouded in such mystery. This blend of myth and reality is why Sappho's legacy continues to resonate. In a world that often values spectacle over substance, her work reminds us of the power of authenticity. Sappho's poetry doesn't just speak to the heart, it cuts straight to the bone, unearthing truths about love and desire that are as relevant now as they were in ancient Lesbos. Her ability to convey complex emotions in just a few lines is a skill that many modern poets aspire to, and her influence is a quiet testament to the enduring power of the written word. So why do we keep coming back to Sappho, like moths to a flame that burned out millennia ago? It's simple, really. Her poetry is a mirror held up to the human experience, reflecting our innermost joys and sorrows with a clarity that transcends time. In an era where digital communication often feels hollow, Sappho's words offer a reminder of the raw, unfiltered connection we all crave. Her work is a clarion call to embrace vulnerability and emotion, in a world that often prizes stoicism and detachment. But let's not kid ourselves. Sappho's legacy isn't just about high-minded ideals and literary accolades. It's also about the messy, complicated business of being human, with all its contradictions and complexities. The myths that swirl around her life are a testament to our endless fascination with stories that defy easy categorization. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell ourselves as it is about the facts we can prove. In Sappho's case, the line between legend and reality is as blurred as a watercolor painting left out in the rain, a testament to the enduring allure of a good story. So, as we wrap up this journey through Sappho's life and legacy, let's take a moment to reflect on why she still matters. In a world awash with information, where every moment is documented and every thought shared, Sappho's poetry offers a refuge, a space where simplicity reigns and emotions are laid bare. Her work is a reminder that, even in a world of tweets and sound bites, the power of a single, well-chosen word can still leave a lasting impact. In the end, Sappho's legacy is a testament to the timeless nature of art and the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity. Her poetry, much like her life, is a blend of myth and reality, offering a glimpse into a world where emotions were as vivid as the Aegean sky at dusk. And while we may never fully unravel the mysteries of her life, one thing is certain: Sappho's words will continue to echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart. As we close the book on this exploration, remember that Sappho's story is far from over. Her voice, though often whispered through the fragments of time, continues to inspire those who dare to listen, challenging us to look beyond the myths and embrace the reality of a woman whose words refuse to be silenced.